For instance, like dating or a lot of like red pill stuff is like this, where I think there's a lot of problems that are caused today. I think the internet has dramatically changed so much of our life, but people will express it in terms of like, oh, like I can't date anybody and it's because of like feminism, or oh, there's like this thing, blah, blah, blah. But in actuality, they're expressing some underlying thing. They have a frustration and the frustration is real, but they don't exactly know where it's coming from, so they pin it on something different.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. Sure. Yeah.
That's what I'm getting at. So when we talk about Palestinian violence against Jews, they will say that our problem is, let's say, occupation or loss of sovereignty. The issue is the settlements. The issue is Al-Aqsa. There's a whole list of excuses in terms of why they are violent. But the truth is that none of these are the real fundamental underlying cause. And I would like to try to demonstrate that for you.
I want to be really careful about this. In the online communities that I hang out with and the pro-Palestinian crowds that I hang out with, the opinion that you just gave would make you a far-right Zionist.
I live in Israel. I found it very surprising, but also very interesting that you've started to look into our conflict so much. I really appreciate how much primary research you've done, and that you haven't just like decided to read tweets. Really, it's incredible what you've been doing these past few months, so I'd like to say thank you for that. But I would like to challenge your understanding of a few fundamental aspects of this conflict and the broad history. I think you, not really through any fault of your own, it's not like Wikipedia is going to say anything this way, and a lot of people are not going to talk about it this way. When you say it's a religious conflict and you say religion doesn't play a role, it's not necessarily that the people on either side are religious. Like you see, the early Zionist movement was very secular, and a lot of the Palestinian resistance movements were secular too. Not Hamas. Hamas is an explicitly Islamist organization. But you have this in the Middle East. It's important to understand that religion is often just it's a proxy for tribal identity. So you have Jews who are secular, you have Jews who are religious, but they align on one side of the conflict, even though they have a lot of disagreements. And you'll have Muslims who have various levels of belief and observance. Some of them might just be cultural Muslims, some of them might be Arabs, but they will align on the other side of the Israel-Palestine conflict. Again, they have their factions, they have their disagreements. So I think when we say that the conflict is religious, we don't necessarily mean that, oh, if you just took the religion out, everyone would get along. They wouldn't, because the tribal identity is still there, the difference in culture, the difference in common fate. Does that make sense? When we
So not to disappoint you, I think I would actually completely agree with that. The reason why I tend to push back on it is because I think that people don't mean that when they say that. I think people lean very heavily into the religious aspects of it, such that the religion is like the determinative factor for why Muslims are so evil towards Jews or why Jews don't like Muslims or whatever. I think that any time you get a conflict with a certain culture, a certain whatever, that all the things associated with that culture are going to play into the conflict a little bit. So for instance, if like every Jew was 5 feet tall and every Arab was 7 feet tall, that there would be, if like that you could say to some extent that like height plays a role into the conflict, and that 7 feet tall people all hate 5 feet tall people, and 5 feet tall people hate 7 feet tall people. And that might start to show up in like literature and poetry and other types of belief systems. But that if you just remove the height difference, it's not going to like dramatically alter the conflict. I think that when people say religion is like the big or a big part of it, they think that it is like the determinative thing, that is like the primary thing that's driving the conflict.
Okay, if you agree with that, that's good. But I'd like to take it further then. I really appreciate that you didn't push back on that. Not because I don't want you to push back, you know what I mean. We found some agreement. Now, when we talk about Jews, you know, sometimes, and you see this in interpersonal disagreements too, people will express, let's say, a certain grievance, but sometimes that's not really their grievance, because you can analyze, let's say, if in another setting or another circumstance, when you take that particular thing they're complaining away, they're still upset about something else, and what's really bothering them is something that's underlying it, but they'll convey it a certain way. Have you experienced that before, even in interpersonal conflict?
Yeah, for sure. I'm trying to think of an example, but like people might like generate like I think a lot of, for instance, like dating or a lot of like red pill stuff is like this, where I think there's a lot of problems that are caused today. I think the internet has dramatically changed so much of our life, but people will express it in terms of like, oh, like I can't date anybody and it's because of like feminism, or oh, there's like this thing, blah, blah. But in actuality, they're expressing some underlying thing. They have a frustration and the frustration is real, but they don't exactly know where it's coming from, so they pin it on something different.
Yes.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. Sure. Yeah.
That's what I'm getting at. So when we talk about Palestinian violence against Jews, they will say that our problem is, let's say, occupation or loss of sovereignty. The issue is the settlements. The issue is Al-Aqsa. There's a whole list of excuses in terms of why they are violent. But the truth is that none of these are the real fundamental underlying cause. And I would like to try to demonstrate that for you.
Sure.
You already know, I imagine, about the long list of like riots and massacres in the 1920s and 1930s.
Yeah.
Early Mandate period. Correct. So they would say that, well, you had no right to come here. You had no right to take land that historically had belonged to us. Now, very often when I've talked to hundreds of Palestinians, I've really tried to understand this conflict from their perspective. And
Wait, real quick.
when you
Can you tell me?
Sure.
You said you live in Israel. Can you tell me your
Yeah.
age and like the city you live in, or you don't have to if you're not going to be that specific?
Sure,
but-
I'm 28. I will
Okay.
not say the city that I live in. I can DM it to you after. I just don't want to say it publicly on stream.
Okay, that's fine.
It's somewhere in the Negev, around 20 or 30 minutes away from Gaza. Like
Okay,
a lot
okay.
of the massacres occurred 5-10 minutes from my house.
Southeast. Yeah. Okay. Gotcha. Okay. Go ahead.
And I'm there right now. Like I was there during October 7th, and I've been there since.
Gotcha.
So, yeah. What were we talking about? Oh, we were talking about the
You were saying that you were going to
violence during the
demonstrate
Mediterranean.
that these underlying reasons aren't actually, or you're going to demonstrate that these reasons of people saying why they commit violence aren't the actual reasons, and then you asked me about the 20s
Yeah,
and 30s,
yeah.
and then go ahead.
So clearly, it's not the occupation, it's not the state, because those reasons didn't exist back then, and they still did those things. Also, it's very important to note that in those 15 years, from 1921, there was the Petah Tikva massacre in 1886, there was the Jaffa riot in 1908, but I'll leave that aside for a second. We'll focus on the 20s and 30s. You'll see why in a second.
Okay.
Did you come across that the Haganah had this policy called the Havlaga policy, which in Hebrew means restraint, meaning that they didn't retaliate until 1936, 15 years of like massacres, riots, etc., and they did not fire a shot back because they were trying to stay on good terms with the British. It was only when the Irgun broke off in 1936 with that specific reason, because they're like, we're getting massacred, we're not retaliating, that's insane. The Haganah kept their policy when the Irgun broke off.
Gotcha.
But putting that aside, what happens, we actually do have a counterfactual. What if a population is not a foreign colonizer? I don't really like the settler colonial framing. I'd like to get to that as well, but putting that aside for a second, what if you have a group that's been in the land for thousands of years? You'll find that they actually have a problem with them having any sovereignty as well. And that is the case of the Assyrians, who are a Christian minority ethnic group they used to have a big empire, like 2,700 years ago, but obviously it's long gone. They have a continuous presence in the region, and Arabs and local Iraqi nationalists during the Mandate period still did the exact same thing to them that they did to us. They still did this whole massacre. You can look up Sayfo, Sayfo, and Simele, Simele, and even in the Wikipedia article for Simele, it explicitly says the motivation of the Iraqi nationalists was to try to convince the British the same way to not let these people have a state, to not give them sovereignty. And even now, they're like this persecuted minority. Under Saddam, they definitely were. The Ottomans also kind of massacred them.
Do you think the Kurds fit this definition as well?
I don't know as much about the Kurds, to be
Okay.
completely honest with you. It is
Okay.
very possible this happened to the Kurds. I just don't know enough about that.
Gotcha. Okay.
Yeah,
Okay,
the
sorry,
Kurds
go ahead.
actually massacred Assyrians. It's really ironic that you bring up in this context, the Kurds were part of the groups that massacred Assyrians.
Okay.
So
I guess
Arabs-
another counterfactual, another question I would ask is, why is it that I believe that when Jews started coming to the Mandate Palestine area, that one of the intentional goals of them was to also unite other religious minorities as well. Why didn't the other religious minorities, like I guess what it would be like the Druze or the Bedouins or whatever, why didn't they align themselves with Palestinian Arabs? And why didn't Palestinian Arabs have an easy time like recruiting those other minorities into their factions?
Oh, sure. So in the case of the Druze specifically, the Druze were actually suffering from violence from the Palestinians as well, and that's why they sided with the Jews against the Palestinians.
Yeah,
So-
that would be that'd be another thing to just point out there. Yeah, another quick thing also. I'm sorry, because this is a really good point that Benny Morris had brought up. Is Benny? I spoke to him a lot before our debate. That I promise happened and will get posted at some point. He said that arguing on the grounds of the 47 partition plan being unfair was a really stupid ground to argue on, because you're immediately ceding the argument that Palestinians would have been okay with some partition if the land would have been less. That you shouldn't be arguing that 55% of land was allotted to a Jewish state or blah, blah, blah. The reality is that no matter how much land would have been allotted, they never would have accepted it. 20% allotment still would have been turned down by the Arabs in the area. That you shouldn't fight on the ground if they would have accepted something if it was just smaller. Because of the underlying fact that they just didn't want them there at all. Yeah.
I will address that in a second. I just wanted to say, with the Druze specifically, there was this event called Abu Dura, and they were like raped, mass rape in Abu Dura, and that's one of the reasons they sided against the Palestinians. Just had to mention that.
Sure. Okay.
Anyway, back to the Benny Morris thing. I've done this so many times already. I've spoken to so many Palestinians trying to understand them. I have like my whole line of questioning, right? It's like, it's not 20 questions, it's like a few hundred questions.
Okay.
Like it's a whole dialogue tree down where they'll go. And I almost always, except in like very few cases, they will acknowledge they were not really okay with not an event. Abu Dura was the head of a Druze sorry, whatever.
Okay.
I don't want to get sidetracked by that. You can look it up later. They're not really okay with like an inch of Jewish sovereignty anywhere in the land. Not on the coastline, not in the heartland, not anywhere. Like that is their fundamental problem. And the Iraqis had a similar problem with the Assyrians.
Mm-hmm.
So like ultimately the whole thing of like this are these arguments about which land was arable, which land was, you could do agriculture, which land you could do it's not really material. They were not okay with any sovereignty. And the other thing is, this is a big problem I have with a lot of the discourse on this conflict too, the whole anti-Zionism, anti-Semitism thing. First, I want to commend you, by the way, that you don't use anti-Semitism as like an argument or a talking point when it comes to Finkelstein. Even if it's true, it's just a losing battle rhetorically. So
Yeah.
Good job. I do the same thing in terms of avoiding that. But the thing is, like, a lot of the communities that got massacred in 1929 were communities that were there for centuries, long before any kind of Zionism. And they were even explicitly anti-Zionist with the Hebron massacre. A lot of people don't know this, but Ben Gurion and the Haganah kind of offered them help. Like, it's okay, we know that this will happen soon. We might, we can help you. We can send like armed defense to make sure the Arabs don't massacre you. They explicitly refused, knowing what would happen, and they got massacred anyway because they were so ideologically and religiously opposed to Zionism. Similarly to the Jews who lived all over the Middle East and North Africa, in many cases, they completely. They had nothing to do with Zionism, and they still got ethnically cleansed. The point is, the Arabs kind of turned this into a war on the Jewish nation and Jewish existence in the Middle East and North Africa. And that's when I can even agree, to some extent, that if let's say, the Zionists, you can argue, I can see the argument that they had no right to come back, even though Jews are originally from this land.
Mm-hmm.
However, once the Arabs...
Wait. Did the Zionists made that argument, or did Arabs made that argument? Did you...
Arabs made that argument.
Yeah, okay,
I can understand the argument that even if Jews are from here, it was a long time ago, etc., they have no right to come back. Once you start massacring Jewish communities that are what you, like, even you call Palestinian Jews, or the expulsion of Jews from Iraq, from Egypt, from all these countries, you completely lose the right to say that this is not a war on the national existence of the Jewish people in the region.
Yeah, or even more broadly, because it gets difficult if somebody wants to... There's a lot of times where where pro-Palestinians or Arabs will say something like, this wasn't a war against Jews, or when we say anti-Zionism, it has nothing to do with Jews, we're just fighting against like the European immigrants. And it's like, well, that's interesting. Why is it that after 48, why is it that after 56, why is it after 67, there were so many pogroms or push factors from Jews all across the Arab world? These weren't Zionists, these weren't people living in Palestine, these were just Jews living in your borders. Like, that's like, you can't just blame all these Jews for saying like, wow, I feel like Zionism and Jewishness seem to be more closely tied than we would have liked it to be because we're getting killed for Zionists when we're just Jews. It seems hard for Arabs to defend that argument. Like, there must have been some undercurrent of association here. Yeah.
Yeah, there absolutely was.
Yeah.
And the other thing is, one thing that shows that this whole kind of European settler thing is more disingenuous, it's like kind of that doublespeak thing, is because they will say things that, so in the Quran, and this is some background, in the Quran there is this verse about how, let me just pull it up, I have it open as a tab right here. Give me 1 second please. Here, so this is 59:14 in the Quran. Even united, they would not dare fight against you except from within fortified strongholds or from behind walls. Their malice from each other is intense. You think they are united, yet their hearts are divided. That is because they are people with no real understanding. So this whole verse is used over and over by Muslims to speak about Zionists. The whole, like, they're cowards, they'll only fight, they'll only bomb you from warplanes, they won't go down and fight you like men on the battleground. So this attribution, there's the Bani Israel, which is like in Hebrew, Bnei Israel, the children of Israel, in the Quran are mentioned. There's no Palestine mentioned in the Quran. But there are these like ancient Jews. In the Quran, Allah gave them the land. They were spreading corruption throughout the land, so Allah punished them, and He took away like their chosen status. He abrogated their covenant. So they make all these parallels between if you ask them, are Bani Israel, are they the same Jews as today? They say, no, these are just European converts, these are Khazars, they have all these like excuses, but then they will use things in the Quran, according to Ibn Kathir, who's one of the main interpreters of, he's one of the main like commentaries on the Quran in Sunni Islam. He will say that this verse refers to the Bani Israel at the time, the Jews, like this is how they fight. Banu an-Nadir, who was a specific tribe locally in the Arabian Peninsula at the time. So they'll use that. What's another one that they'll say? They'll say like, I can't remember it right now, but they make all these references to the Jews of the Quran and the Jews of the time And then they'll say like the Jews of today. How does that make any sense if you don't believe these are the same Jews as back then?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, that just sounds like standard weaponizing of religion to when it suits you, when it doesn't. Something I'm curious about, if there was large-scale excavation at the Temple Mount and Jews found another temple, what would that mean for like the Arab world? Would anything big change or something happen, or what would that look like?
Do you mean the ruins of a temple? Because
Yes.
the temple has been destroyed.
That's what I mean, yeah.
So, but
Because my understanding is there's a
literally-
huge disagreement that I think Arafat and Abbas, and I think a lot of Arabs try to say that like the Al-Aqsa Mosque and the Temple Mount, they aren't actually built on another temple. There's not another temple under there, and there's a huge like disagreement of like you can never excavate that. It's not fair because if they were to find one, would that happen, or do you think there's one there, or is that just like Jewish bullshit as well, or?
I'll even avoid the question for you. I'll tell you something even more. I don't know if you'll be surprised by this. You know Al-Husseini, the Mufti guy?
The Mufti, yeah.
He, under the British mandate, he oversaw the releasing of an English language tourist pamphlet for Palestine, for people coming, and he says there that this Temple Mount is the site of Solomon's temple. There was no contention about this back then. It's only as this issue became politicized that the Muslim world started completely denying history that was fully acknowledged by them before.
Yeah.
So, like, I think the whole thing is insane. Even the Muslims, by the way, the what's their name? The Mustaravim, who were these Ashkenazi Jews who started coming to Arab lands in like the 1500s. There was no contention at the time that they were Jews. Like, they assimilated into Arab culture. They would ever, and no one said, "Oh, you're European colonizers. You're this." It's not necessarily like a blood thing. It's like you're coming here with your different way of life, and we don't appreciate that. And you're coming here, you want to create like Western style with your own sovereignty.
Yeah.
But yeah, with the whole Temple Mount thing, like, this was something. So many aspects of basic Jewish identity and history were completely not disputed by Muslims until Israel-Palestine. All of a sudden, Jews are just the remains of converts. Jews are not the original Bani Israel. Jews are all these things. So that's like a very frustrating thing when talking to them.
Sure. Well. Yeah. Yeah. Anything else? Or?
Many. I don't know how long you'll entertain me for.
Sure. Yeah. Keep them down.
Sure. So, a lot. Are you aware that even long before Zionism, there were many, many massacres against Jews all over the Arab world and in Palestine too? There were like entire expulsions. Sorry, let me just preface this. In the 7th century, so when the Muslims conquered under Caliph Omar, they conquered Israel and Jerusalem at the time. There was this I forgot to say. Yeah, there was communities of Jews, hundreds of thousands of Jews, continuous presence from Roman times. The Romans had deported and killed many, many Jews since, the destruction of the temple. But there was, like, if you look at even the Babylonian Talmud, there's still entire communities of Jews during the 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th century. They were traveling back and forth between Israel and Babylon at the time. And the Arab conquests, when they got there, the Jews were still there. And even there's still records of Jews well into the 8th, 9th, 10th, 11th, like continuous presence, large communities into the 12th century even. And it's actually the Arabs who eroded the presence of the Jews and their demography with, I don't even like to use this word because in the Middle Eastern context I think this is so stupid, but they use it, so I'm going to use it here. They settler colonized Israel and turned it from like Jewish, I don't know if it was a majority, but they turned it from at least like having hundreds of thousands of Jews who were a sizable plurality of the population to a Jewish minority region that was mostly inhabited by Arabs. Sure. And this is like that, now they call us settler colonialists.
I've heard that they've like moved in a lot of people, forced a lot of Jews to convert, or through other ways kind of got them to convert or other things. Yeah, I don't know how true this is. I don't know. I don't have a great grasp of the ancient history, but yeah, I'm like aware of like the broad strokes of this.
Okay, and that's why I think the whole settler, especially in a region like the Middle East, where there's so many migrations, so many resettlements by the Ottomans, by the Mamluks, by the Crusaders, by all these empires that went through, and now to say like in 1948 we're gonna freeze this point in time where there's this unified Palestinian nation, and now the people who come, who were actually here before you, now they're settler colonialists. I have a huge problem with this framing. I imagine you can understand why.
Yeah, I usually just started like 1880, like because it feels very weird or arbitrary to say like, well, these people have historic right to this land because the Ottomans, conquered it in whatever 1300 or 700 or whatever the fuck, I don't remember how long these people existed for, but like they conquered this land like 1,000 years ago. But it's like, okay, well, if we're gonna go back that long, like why not to 2,000 years ago? And there's never a good answer for why you can't go back that far. There's just never an answer, and it feels arbitrary and stupid. So I try not to deal too much with the historic land arguments because I feel like all of that is like beyond stupid. Yeah.
Can I ask you, and if this is too big of an ask, you don't have to, can you at least, unless you're quoting an Arab saying this, but would you be able to stop calling Jews? I'm not offended when I understand why. Like I understand how you've researched this. Would you stop calling Jews like white settler colonists or like white Europeans?
I don't think I call them settler colonists, but I think the reason why I point that out is because I do think that the conflict started because of, I mean, I think you just said as much, that it was the idea that Europeans were coming in and trying to set up a European-style state that was largely incongruent with the culture, values, and the vision that I think Arabs in that land had. I think that was part of the huge contention.
Okay, fair enough. Yeah, it was. I will not dispute, of course, that the Zionists being secular. This is important to note also in terms of within the Jewish nation, the Zionists were seen by religious Jews as kind of trying to destroy Jewish religious identity, and they opposed, even to this day, there's many parts of like the ultra-Orthodox world that will oppose Zionism to the death, and they did not appreciate that. So
sure,
yeah, Zionism
I don't think I ever refer to them as like settler. I fight against, because the settler colonial just doesn't make sense in this sense.
Okay.
Yeah.
Fair enough. Yeah, it's not like I was offended by it or anything, but I didn't think it was accurate. Maybe I misheard you.
Sure.
Back in the time.
Yeah. It also depends on who I'm arguing against. If I'm arguing against somebody who's very far right, I'm like, because they'll just say like, oh no, it was just anti-Semitism. They hated Jews. And it's like, well, no, I think it was obviously a reaction to mass immigration from Europe. I think it was a huge part of it, and then them trying to set their own country. But if I'm arguing with like a super pro-Palestinian, like I'm going to bring up the fact that most of the Jews there, especially after all the Aliyah, after all the huge waves of immigration, most of them are descendants of the Middle East at this point, is my understanding in Israel proper, right?
Say it again?
The majority of the Jewish people living in Israel proper are descendants from people from the Middle East now, right? After all the waves of immigration and everything?
Yeah, for sure.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but it's very important to note, I don't know how much you've looked into Jewish genetics, with the exception of the Ethiopian and the Indian Jews, who are outliers who overall prove the rule. I can send you the study on this if you'd like. It's by Doron Behar. It's the something study of the Jewish genome. But with those exceptions of those particular diaspora, Ashkenazi, Sephardi, and Mizrahi Jews overwhelmingly cluster together on like when you do a multi-analysis PCA chart.
Okay. I'm not making genetic arguments. I don't fuck all that, but
yeah, I don't make genetic arguments. I don't think like, oh, because we are one genetic people or something, therefore we have a right to the land. I just
I think it's really funny that there's like some study that people cited, and maybe I just couldn't read it or I misunderstood it, but people were trying to cite these like genetic clusters to prove how different Palestinian Arabs were from like Syrians and Lebanese and everything, or I'm sorry, from Syrians and like Jordanese and everything. And when you looked at it seemed like when you looked at the images, they were actually almost incredibly similar, or they were like almost identical. They were like incredibly similar genetically. I was like, what?
Exactly.
Okay, yeah, it's dumb. But
that's another thing, by the way. When you look at like Arabs from Syria, from Egypt, from the Western Hejaz, which is like Saudi Arabia, from Lebanon, etc. A lot of the Palestinians, I imagine you know this at this point, they have the same like tribal last names as those people.
Sure.
And then like there's concrete evidence. Even like Churchill was talking about how there's a ton of Arab migration into the Mandate as a result of like the Zionist development. I'm not saying there were no Arabs there, and some of them have definitely even been there for over 1,000 years. I'm not denying that. But there was also, notice that like a Palestinian who's from Yemen or Morocco or Iraq, literally within the last 150 years, is somehow like an indigenous native, but a Jew is like a settler colonialist. Like that dichotomy also really messes with my head when they use that.
Yeah, it's very weird and dumb. It's a lot of yeah, Benny talked about this too, that and I'd already agreed with this before even talking to him, that like people will hardcore project very modern notions or understandings of peoples or nations or ethnicities back onto the late 19th century, early 20th century, that understanding. And it doesn't really map on at all to how people viewed any of that back then. And yeah, it's really silly, yeah. That if you were to listen to the typical pro-Palestinian arguments today, what it basically sounds like is there was a group of people who all called themselves the Palestinians, who were all part of a Palestinian tribe, who all lived together, had a culture together, like almost a quasi-state or big tribe together in the Palestinian land, and then they were all cohesive, and the Jews came and just broke it all up and fucked it all up. As opposed to that there were lots of people that were moving in and out. A lot of it was on like tribal lines, similar to Yemen, like families and stuff, and villages and subsistence farming, and it wasn't this cohesive group of people that strongly identified along these like British-imposed nationalistic lines. That identity didn't really form until it was a response to the Jews that were immigrating from Europe.
Yeah. And I think you even said this at one point, which was that like the fact that they had this unified enemy of the Jews actually stabilized and unified them in a way. If there was just the state of Palestine or whatever it would have been, like in 1947, if the Jews never started returning, you would have just seen wars between like Palestine and Egypt and Palestine and Lebanon and Jordan. Like it would not be some stable region. People try to act like Israel's the reason that this region is on fire the way that it is. Like the Syrian civil war, it's all Israel's fault, etc. Like just this. It's because of the Western presence. There's something like magical. It's almost a blood and soil understanding of like, you people don't belong here. You're white people, but we like brown indigenous stewards of the land. Everything would have been just perfect if you had let us like.
Yeah, but like look at the Syrian civil war. Look at all the tribal divisions in Yemen that have happened since the inception of that state. Look at the Iraq-Iran war. Look at Turkey fighting with everybody. Yeah, for sure, 100%. Yeah.
Okay. If I may, by the way, just before I move on to the next topic, has the counterfactual of the Assyrians, who are not a group that came from the outside, does that change your understanding a little bit of like it was more opportunism now that everyone was going to get their own state in the Mandate period, and that's why they started like ramping up the violence in the 20s?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think my perspective was much different than that at the time. Or what perspective do you think I had before?
I think it was like they had a problem with like people coming from outside rather than they just had a problem with anyone else having sovereignty that wasn't them.
Yeah, I feel like that's always been my take, that the expectation for all the surrounding states was basically that the mandate system was allotting a piece of territory. They were going to see which governments that they installed or emerged from those territories were stable, and then those people were going to have states handed over to them. And especially once they saw this happening in like Syria and Iraq and Jordan, that the Palestinians were like, wait, holy shit, it doesn't look like we're going to get a state because there's this huge growing organ of the Yishuv and all the Jews coming in from Europe, and now we're getting fucked. And then that was like the reaction to that, basically. Yeah.
Okay, fine. Fair point. Now I'd like to talk to you about two more topics, primarily settlements and Iran.
Okay.
And like, which one do you want to do first?
Either one, go. Yeah.
Okay. Settlements, I guess, is like the more important thing.
Wait. Before we get into settlements, can I ask you a question? This is kind of mind blowing if this is true. Somebody told me they said this like offhanded, that actually like 400,000 settlers live in the West Bank, but they live west of the border wall, and that it's only like 100,000 people that live like east of the border wall. Do you know if that's true or not?
My impression was, and I could be wrong about this, that that 400,000 figure included like Ariel and included Ma'ale Adumim and included like all the big settlement blocks that Israel would normally keep. But maybe I'm wrong. I don't want to say something that is not true.
Okay, all right. I was just curious. I didn't know if that was true. That was a huge claim if that was actually true. But okay, go ahead.
Okay, like it doesn't sound true to me, but again, I don't actually know, so I don't want to concretely answer that. I've been to the West Bank many times. I've even been to like those outpost settlements in the middle of nowhere. I have some friends who live there.
Okay.
But anyway, so regarding settlements, I think the problem is people say like the settlements are the impediment to peace, but then when you withdraw the settlements, it looks like one of the big problems is it might not be that let's say it's not even a majority of Palestinians who are necessarily violent. Maybe if you actually had like an Assad-style ruler in the West Bank with that level of brutality, that you could maintain order. But there's like a million small factions who have every incentive to use violence no matter what, and their dream, like one of the problems with when I talk to Palestinians and I ask them like, okay, let's say Israel tomorrow withdraws from the West Bank and Gaza and Al-Aqsa, like you get everything you could possibly want. It even like Ariel and Ma'ale Adumim, even all these like big settlement blocks, Israel even withdraws from them and you get 110% of the West Bank. Are you really going to just leave us alone now? And the answer that the majority of them give is no, like we want the 48 lands back. Maybe it's just the ones I've spoken to, but it feels like even in Palestinian society, you still have a critical mass of enough of them who are not willing to give up on what they call like Israel proper, and they want Ramla and Lod back and Beersheba and West Jerusalem, and like it's a humiliation, it's a provocation that the Jews still rule those lands. Actually, like obviously Hamas are extremists, they're an extreme example, but like there's videos of them at their kindergarten graduations where they dress up all the kids in like the Hamas headbands and the AKs, and they play audio. This is obviously like a fantasy in the future where the last Israeli soldier has surrendered, we've taken back control of every last town of Palestine. Like this is the dream and aspiration that is deeply rooted, like the revanchism that is like buried in their consciousness. I don't know how to get it out, and I think that's like a big impediment to peace.
Yeah, it's hard to know like what's real or not real, but one of the things that was brought up a lot about Arafat was that even after the Oslo Accords, this guy would give speeches and shit in schools where he would talk about how, yes, we're making these deals now, but there's a specific name for what he said, how he described these things. It's a type of Islamic lie that you tell to further another... What?
Taqiyya?
I've heard of that term, but it's not that.
It wasn't that term.
Oh, give me a second.
Was it Hudna?
Maybe.
Okay. the PLO, there's literally multiple quotes. It's not like one, where I actually want to read this to you because this is directly relevant to what we're saying. A member of the Fatah Central Committee, his name is Abbas Zaki, I can send you the link to this if you request. Anything that I say, by the way, if you want the link, just like DM me, even if it's after this, I'm happy to provide it.
Sure.
He says, you can relax. We find ourselves united for the first time. Even the most extreme... he's responding to the Syrian TV host is asking, when the U.S. talks about imposing a solution, we know it'll be deficient because, you're only getting part of the land back. That's me saying it. He's not saying that. So he responds, you can relax. We find ourselves united for the first time. Even the most extreme among us, Hamas, or the fighting forces, want a state within the 67 borders. After, we will have something to say because the inspiring idea cannot be achieved all at once, rather in stages. And there's this phased plan spelled out by the PLO in 1974 that they've never rescinded, as far as I know, unless someone can provide me them rescinding it. The point is, this is why I don't trust them with the two-state solution, is because the two-state solution is just a springboard, it's just a stepping stone to get all of the land back, and once they've consolidated contiguous control, you can have I want to read you this quote from an article by, it's by Elliot Abrams, who I don't agree with him on everything in terms of like U.S. foreign policy, but I think this quote really encompasses like so much of the distrust that many Israelis feel about the two-state solution.
Okay.
So he writes, he's talking about, give me 1 second. Oh, here. It's true that limitations on Palestinian sovereignty can be built into any two-state solution, and Palestinian officials can sign them in blood, but the blood will fade. The limitations will be viewed by Palestinians the way most Germans viewed the limitations imposed by the Versailles Treaty. Those who seek to live with them will be called traitors, and those who demand abrogating or violating them will be nationalists and heroes. And the Israelis will find many deaf ears in the international community about the growing dangers until they try to do their own enforcement. Then they will hear loud voices in every UN body in dozens of world capitals denouncing their aggression against the new Palestine. Now add Iran to that mix. The great threats to Israel today, unless and until Iran develops a nuclear weapon, all come from Iranian proxy groups. Hezbollah, the Houthis, Hamas, Palestinian Islamic Jihad, the rest. The day a Palestinian state is declared is the day Iran hypes up its efforts, which are already considerable, to turn the West Bank into what Gaza became in the last decade, a maze of arsenals, training centers, tunnels, launching sites, and bases for terrorist attacks. Only this time the
I'm sorry, finish your quote. Go ahead.
Only this time the geography will be different, because the hills of Judea and Samaria overlook Ben Gurion Airport, Jerusalem, and the coastal plain where most Israel's economy, its largest port, and its largest city are located.
Who was this quote from, and what was the year?
This is an article by someone. I just think he says it better than I can. I'll link it to you. Should I DM it?
I'm just curious, when was this written?
Like, I don't know, a few months ago.
Oh,
it's
okay.
a common sentiment that. Unless you're talking about the PLO guy quote, that was a different one.
Yeah, gotcha. Okay, this is just
analysis.
These are the quotes I was thinking from this book I read. Hamas and Jihad lost no time in unleashing a campaign of terror in the hope that this would lead to the radicalization of Israeli public opinion and consequently to a shift to the right, which they expected would undermine and cripple Rabin's peace policies. On the very eve of the signing of the DOP, which I think is a declaration of principles related to the Oslo Accords, 3 Israeli soldiers were slaughtered by a Hamas squad in Gaza. Suicide terrorism was not the invention of the Second Intifada. It had already started in the euphoric days of Oslo. The day after the DOP was signed, on the 14th of September 1993, a Palestinian terrorist blew himself up in an Israeli police station in Gaza, but the bad omens for the future of Oslo did not come only from the Islamic opposition. On May 11th, 1994, a week after he had signed the Cairo Agreement establishing the modalities for Palestinian self-rule in Gaza and Jericho, and a few days before he himself returned to an ecstatic reception in Gaza, Arafat called in a speech behind closed doors in Johannesburg for a jihad to recover Jerusalem. He went to the extreme of comparing Oslo with the Prophet's tactical Hudaybiyah agreement.
That was the Treaty of Hudaybiyah.
Yes, of AD 625. Yes, with the Quraysh tribe, an expedient peace that could be broken when the circumstances would warrant it. Though he liked to position himself as a Palestinian Mandela or as the leader of a modern secular movement of national liberation, Arafat remained essentially loyal to his youth as a member of the Muslim Brotherhood, and as such, his real hero and model was the Mufti Haj Amin al-Husseini, as he himself recognized in an interview with the Palestinian daily Al-Quds of on August 2nd of 2002. And I think there's another reference here where he makes another speech essentially like that, where he's saying, like, we can just build time. As it turned out, the Johannesburg speech was not an isolated incident where Arafat simply got carried away. He uttered similar notions on other occasions. One such was a speech in Gaza's Al-Azhar University on the day celebrating the ascension of the Prophet to heaven, where he spoke again of, how do you pronounce this? Hudaybiyah?
Treaty of Hudaybiyah.
Hudaybiyah as a despised peace. On another occasion, a meeting with an Arab audience in Stockholm, as quoted by Yedidia Atlas from the Norwegian newspaper Dagen, Arafat presented the right of return and the demographic weapon as his way to subvert the spirit of the Oslo Accords. Quote, "We of the PLO will now concentrate all our efforts on splitting Israel psychologically into two camps. We will make life unbearable for the Jews by psychological warfare and population explosion," end quote. This was to be Arafat's mode of behavior throughout the Oslo years. His was always the language of battle and jihad. Quote, "We stand by our oath to pursue the battle," end quote. He promised in a speech at Al-Azhar, where he also embraced the memory of Izzeddin al-Qassam, the icon of Hamas's struggle against the Zionist entity. He would never convey a clear message of peace and reconciliation to the Israeli public. A born master of double talk, he always preferred the language of ambiguities. Throughout his life as a terrorist and guerrilla leader, Arafat avoided an open confrontation with his rivals in the movement. He preferred to co-opt them, holding the national movement together at all costs, shunning clear-cut divisive decisions, forever looking for leadership through consensus, even when this meant not curbing the terrorist activities of those he had pledged to discipline in the Oslo Accords. Such was his disastrous and eventually self-defeating way of government throughout. Yeah, those are the two things I was looking for, yeah.
Yeah, I really appreciate it. If you could send me those quotes, I'd appreciate it. If it's too much effort, don't worry about it. But there's this concept in Islam called, I might not be pronouncing this right because I'm not an Arabic speaker, but it's like marhalat al-ittirab, which means like a stage of weakness when you don't have the military strength to take on Israel right now. Or like the Taliban also use this in Afghanistan. Like, we might not be strong enough to take on the US or the Soviet Union. However, their resolve will eventually fade when they realize the cost is not worth it. Same thing with like the French in Algeria. Over time, they'll have their own considerations, and then all we have to do is outlast them, kind of.
Yeah.
And this is like, for Palestinians, most of them are Muslim, so these ideas do factor in somehow. It's not like they're much more Muslim than Jews are religiously.
Sure, it's part of the mythos of these people. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, and a lot of them kind of say, we will outlast you. You people, they exaggerate this in terms of how they see the Jews, because they don't really understand. The Jews actually kind of feel like they have nowhere else to go. But they say, like, you guys have dual citizenship, you guys can find refuge in Western countries, but we're like the Algerian versus the French, and we will outlast you. And it feels like you see the things that really animate them. The Nakba they still cry about to this day.
Yeah.
But when it comes to like 67, they were not ethnically cleansed in 67. Some were kicked out, whatever, but like the vast majority of them remained on their land. And you kind of see that as a result of that, it's not really a long-term deterrent. Like, they are determined to fight as much as they ever have been. The other thing that you kind of said, which I guess maybe it bothered me, maybe I misunderstood you. You said that like Israel does have an incentive to fight because they'll take advantage of, let's say, if they get attacked, they'll take that land back from the people who attack them, like the West Bank from Jordan. So you already know the quote. Benny Moore said it to you on stream about how like they asked Jordan not to attack them
twice,
he did anyway, and then he lost the West Bank. Yeah. So the thing is, if Israel really was even expansionist by opportunity, they would have done like another Nakba on the West Bank. But they didn't. Like, their whole talk in Israel at the time, the discourse, you had the settlers who wanted to go back and live there, but a lot of them kind of wanted to do like land back for peace, the same way that they did with Sinai.
Yeah, because there was huge talks of the Golan Heights for this, and they were always willing. Well, they became willing, I guess, to give up the Sinai because it wasn't. Yeah, the Judea and Samaria, the West Bank, is always like the most important like religious historical lands that is going to be really hard to negotiate over. My point when I brought that up was there's two things that I think have to be kept in mind. Is one, I think that Israel was opportunist when it came to being able to take land, but the opportunities were always afforded to them via Arab aggression, which makes counterfactuals about Israeli expansionism really hard to think about, because it's pretty hard to look at them historically and say they shouldn't have taken land here, when it's like, well, I don't know about that. That's one part. But then the second part is, and I think this is really key to understanding Israel in a way for how they operate in this region, is I think Israel has always had, and maybe this is the European influence, a really good understanding of the countervailing forces between political realities and military realities. And even if the military heavily dictated a lot of movement, Ben-Gurion and the early prime ministers seemed to be hyper aware of forming allegiances or alliances with Western nations. Originally with Great Britain and France, that's why they did the 56 shit, and then eventually with America for security guarantees, helped especially with Yom Kippur. And I think that I think that probably because their backs were against the wall, because it's the only Jewish state and you've got nowhere else to go. I think that Israel played their cards a lot more pragmatically than the Arabs, who were always way more fantastical and delusional with their expectations. And this meant that even if Israel was expansionist, they were realistic at the same time. And I think there's even quotes around, I think it was prior to 67 with Ben Gurion, I think in this book, another one, Ben Gurion's greatest fear was to be facing a unified Arab front with no Western security guarantees. And that at times after 48, Israel was like, listen, this is all the land we're going to have. We're not taking anything else. We just need to survive. And that was a political consideration that Israel would have made. But again, unfortunately, the Arab surrounding states always gave them reason or excuse to occupy and take more.
But when you say expand or occupy or take more, there's this phrase in Hebrew, kibush girush v'yashvut, which means like conquering, expelling, and settling.
Sure.
And it was like a methodology of it's not today. Obviously, that's not happening anymore. But the point is, it's not like they were expanding to kick Arabs off that land and then to make it part of Israel as a completely annexed territory. And that when you say expansionist, but even by opportunity, I think that's the connotation. It's like expansionist by opportunity, but to give the land back for peace past 67.
Well, for the Golan Heights and for the Sinai, yes, but for the West Bank, no. For Gaza, probably not.
So for the West Bank, there were elements inside Israel that wanted to settle, and even the left-wing governments kind of allowed them to, but they did not want to themselves. They kind of felt like they would have to give it back in a peace deal eventually, and if it weren't for the Khartoum resolution, they would have been a lot more open to doing immediate peace talks after 67 to give that land back. So it's not like the government
I think that's totally true, for sure, yeah. I think that East Jerusalem might have been important, because I know that June 9th? When did they take the West Bank in the 6-Day War?
I don't know.
It was like 3 days in. I think Dayan was literally like having people move in to East Jerusalem like as the war was still going on, because that was a big our city gates are open, the old city, we could blah blah blah. But for all of the West Bank, yeah, if the Khartoum resolution wouldn't have happened, then it's possible that Jordan would have been able to make permanent deals or arrangements with Israel post 67, but that never happened. Maybe, yeah. It is very annoying that people bring up Resolution 242 over and over and over again, but don't cite that like a month or two later, the Khartoum resolution comes along where all the Arab states are like, no recognition, no peace, no, what's the third one? It's no resolution, or it's no peace, no negotiation.
No normalization.
It's the 3 no. I always forget what the third no is, but yeah, it was no peace, no communication, and no something else. But yeah, but if that Khartoum that conference wouldn't have been held and that position would have been arrived at, then possibly peace deals would have looked differently, right? Because even later, after Yom Kippur, Israel or Egypt paid the price for that peace with getting expelled or suspended from the Arab League for 10 years. Sadat was assassinated, right? Yeah.
Yeah, but that's my point. Like, Israel was not even looking for long-term expansionism when it came to the West Bank. At least the people who ran the country, like the political establishment, again, there were elements who absolutely wanted the West Bank. But the notion that, like, Israel was even expansionist in terms of its intent when going into these wars, or even after the opportunity arose and they took the land, is not true. And that's kind of my issue with the framing. Like, there's this thing where, and I know this is not intentional on your part, but when you go on, like, Piers Morgan and you say, like, Israel has to be willing to make like to this for peace to happen, and, like the Palestinian, it's like it's almost like the onus is equal. Like there's the two sides are equal in their obstinacy towards peace, but that's historically it's so far from like what we have done with the concessions we've been willing to make historically to make peace, and like they've just been saying like you guys can't exist here.
I agree with what you're saying. I know that it feels weird or doublespeaky, but like my position is going to depend a lot on the audience I'm talking to and how away or which direction the person I'm arguing with is. That's a point that will come up a lot with me and Benny against Norm and Ween, that like they do this weird thing early on, especially because we spend like 2 hours talking about transfer because Norm is a fucking retard that only lives in like 2 Benny Morris quotes that he repeats over and over again. But it's this idea that like, well, the Arabs would have wanted peace and the Jews didn't, but when you look at all of the counterfactuals, or no, I'm sorry, not the counterfactuals, when you look at all the facts, it's Arabs starting aggression, it's Arabs fighting, it's Arabs rejecting peace, it's Arabs saying no to the partition plan in 47, it's Arabs invading in 48, it's Arabs shooting down the Lucerne peace, the deals in 51, it's Arabs that are provoking in 67, it's Arabs that are invading during Yom Kippur, it's the Khartoum resolution, that this argument that like Israel has always been an instigator trying to avoid peace, and it's like I said, I think that there are forms of opportunism that happen. I guess we can get specifically into that, but it's definitely the Arab side never did themselves any favors, and they always gave good reason and good rationale for Israel to take more, I think. As a real quick on something that I said before too, and then you respond to that. Someone in chat said this seems like revisionism. There was constant cabinet level discussion about conquering the West Bank post 48. Even during the Suez Crisis, they possibly wanted to bait Jordan into fighting them. Ben Gurion brought it up to the British and French, but they shot him down. I don't disagree that those discussions happened, but like I said before, Israel, because of the realistic conditions that they lived in, always were constrained by the entire cabinet, or by the entire like political discussions, and they were constrained by the political realities who would support them in the West. So while it's true that like there were Israeli leaders that would have liked to snap their fingers and control the entirety of Eretz Israel, the entirety of the mandatory Palestinian area, the political realities constrained them far more than the Arabs, who had no political sense and just wanted to fight forever, I guess. Yeah, that sounds racist or dumb, but whatever, but yeah, go ahead.
Again, there were discussions, but yeah, there was always the understanding that it's more pragmatic, and that's what they would have tried to do if it weren't for the Khartoum resolution. And when it came to the Temple Mount, and you know how Dayan actually gave the keys back for the Temple Mount to the Jordanian Waqf?
How Dayan gave back the keys to the Temple Mount at the Jordanian Waqf. Wait, when was this?
This was like right after the 67 war. Like, we don't have de facto control of the Temple Mount to this day. It's funny, my dad, who was a frontline paratrooper in 67 and 73, on the Egyptian front, not on the Syrian Jordanian front, but he always sees Dayan as a big, it was a real stab in the back. Like, my dad fought under Dayan was like his commander, and he says the fact that Dayan gave back the Temple Mount after the 67 war was such a, why did he do that? It was so stupid of him. We could have had the Temple Mount to this day, but instead, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh wait, that's even.
Can we talk again in 15 minutes? There's a guy that I have a scheduled call with him 4:30. Yeah, okay. Just stay here and I'll be right back, okay?
Sure.
All right, bye. Or 1 sec, be right back.
Hello?
Hi, what's up?
Hey, what's going on?
Nothing much. How you doing? Do you want to introduce yourself?
Good. My name is Sudhir. I'm a Sudhir Keithan. I'm a professor of engineering at Union College in Schenectady, New York. And I kind of gone on to following your stuff after going on to partial YouTube rabbit holes on various topics, I suppose. And I was interested in kind of having you come or do something online remotely for kind of just a student engagement thing. Not on any particular topic, but just I'm kind of really interested in sort of your position or the position of people, streamers who, I guess more generally in the public discourse and where you view yourself and kind of the extent to which even an explicitly good faith actor, which I think you are, who's willing to kind of correct the record on yourself, the extent to which someone in your position, is it possible to be a net value add given all of the potential pitfalls with, the internet and kind of loss of context and non-expertise and all that kind of thing. So, I mean, broadly speaking, I'm just very interested in having a dialogue again with our students who's, I guess, sociopolitical consciousness is pretty muted. It's not very awake. And the extent to which they feel like online streamers who kind of this new model of again, kind of the public discourse, where they view someone like you, where you're positioned there, whether it's possible for you to have a net longitudinal good impact, or whether it's just impossible to avoid falling into the various pitfalls of audience capture or, so I guess, I mean, there's a lot there to unpack, but broadly speaking, I'm a lot more interested in kind of the nature of the medium and how you view yourself in that regard.
Are you asking me, can I view myself as somebody that can be a net positive despite being a layman or a YouTuber, or? Yeah.
I mean, so I'll get an example I'll give is an obvious one. So Joe Rogan, I mean, I think the model of his, I actually think he's a very good faith actor, and to the extent that he goes into territory that he maybe shouldn't, or have some level of sort of editorial responsibility, if you will, for things like fact checking. I guess for someone like him, his model of long form conversations about not really serious things, earlier on in his podcast career was really good stuff, because like a Bernie Sanders could go on there and have like a really good, open, again, long form conversation. But so could someone on the right, and he had this sort of reach where you didn't have to worry right off the bat about bad faith acting, which I think is the worst thing. I think I've heard you say that before. But the issue became when he sort of started to treat really serious topics for which there's a premium on having a historian there or an academic, or an example I'll give is like your conversation with Mark Lalonde Hill. Relative to the vast majority of actors online, I thought it was a wonderful conversation. Both of you again were like in good faith, clearly, which I think is the most important thing. Really a lot of mutual respect, and so that part of it's great. But this might just be the old kind of fashioned get off my lawn academic in me alone. Not that old. It was interesting, kind of the framing of even when you were discussing with him, there was sort of an uncomfortable to me, like during the conversation when he had to leave for a minute, or even right after. If you watch it back, that you kind of made a comment to the effect of like, oh, this is like this guy really knows his stuff. He's like, this is a really good conversation. I'm kind of like really impressed. And even that language was interesting to me and a little disconcerting, because even a few minutes of research beforehand, and maybe you did, and maybe I'm kind of speaking out of turn, but even a few minutes of research beforehand would have revealed the fact that, not only is this person really personally invested, they are, explicitly an expert in the topic. So to the extent that you kind of gave ground or conceded points, it was almost like, like to me, if I'm having a conversation with someone like that with a specific expertise, I'm going to have my own opinions, but it'll be, at least on the basis of, again, background and expertise, it'll be far more, not deferential is not the right word, but I guess what I'm trying to get at is, relative to like the vast majority of content that I see out there, even if you're doing some research in real time and you're kind of informing yourself in real time, the model of good faith right off the bat, and really kind of not having any preconceived notions, it's really good. It's really good stuff overall. But again, I'm wondering if with those potential pitfalls, in a long conversation, there's a lot of assertions, there's a lot of declarative statements that may or may not be true. Again, do you see that as a value add? And to the extent that you see a response in your community, is it possible for people online is it possible for that to be the primary takeaway of having measured good faith interpretations of all these things versus like your really good change my mind series, like the in real life stuff, which I think whose impact is undeniable in terms of like just being a classical model of people communicating.
Let me just, if I can restate to make sure I understand, are you asking me, is it possible that it could be good for layman YouTubers to have conversations with more educated people about like difficult topics online, that displaying those conversations could be a good or a net good in the world? If you're asking me, is that's possible, or?
Yeah, do you think that's possible, or do you think that, so you probably obviously know even if you have the most subtle conversation with someone and there's no appearance of being in bad faith, you're going to be used, like your very presence, your identity is going to be used as kind of a cudgel by various forces, like the trans issue, like I think I mentioned an interaction with a student that I had where their misconception of your position is the misconception, the points. That's part of it, is if there's a conception of you.
Okay. All right. Hold on. I think I understand a little bit more. So let me talk through my idea did you see that I talked to Candace Owens yesterday?
No, I wanted to. I didn't yet, but I imagine that was...
Okay, I'll talk you through like my expectation, the reality, and then the aftermath. We're kind of still in the aftermath, so I'll kind of talk this, and maybe you have an understanding of what's going on. So I think that there's a micro level of analysis of a discrete, like singular event, to where if I talk to Candace Owens, it seems like the goal is, in that conversation, you want to win that conversation. You want to come out as being the debate winner for that particular conversation as hard as you possibly can. The harder, the better. I think that analysis misses a longer trajectory of potential growth or influence. The macro thing that I look at is it's kind of like, I don't know if I would say like losing the battle and winning the war. I don't think I lost that debate to Candace yesterday. I think she looks really goofy, but I could have won harder if I would have been more aggressive. But I think the macro goal is I'm running with a couple assumptions. Assuming that I'm correct, which I generally think I am, assuming that I'm working in good faith, which I generally think I am, assuming that I generally adhere to these principles, and that more exposure to the things that I say versus the things that my interlocutors say is going to slowly move someone over to my side, that means that my goal isn't to just destroy somebody in a singular conversation. My goal is, more broadly speaking, exposure to my epistemology. So my goal wouldn't be to if I bring Candace Owens over and I have a 10-minute conversation where I fucking destroy her so hard that she starts crying and leaves. She's like, oh, this is bullshit, I'm leaving, blah, blah. Okay, that looks better in the micro. It looks better for that discrete debate. I owned her, I could put that on my YouTube, maybe get 500,000 views on the video, and then boom, we're done. On the larger level, if I can increase the amount of exposure I have to these people and the conversations are a bit gentler, and they even perform better in these conversations than they should because I let them get away with a little bit more than I would otherwise if I was more aggressive, the exposure that I get to their audiences, people that see me and they're like, oh, look at this fucking loser, this is bullshit, let's go watch more of his shit, blah, 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 so we can rag on him. That the slow process of conversion that way, I think on a long term is more advantageous than like the short term brutal type of fighting.
I appreciate that, and that's why I think you're probably one of the individuals I think would be really interesting to have this kind of event with, because I mean, another flavor what you're talking about is, I mean, to put my cards on the table, I'm someone who grew up kind of affluent in central New Jersey, and most of the people in my circles, to the extent that they interact with or have any proximity to the average Trump supporter, they just kind of laugh at them. They watch their Colbert Report and do the checkbox thing, and there's just sort of there's an amazing disconnect, or maybe they don't care, but there's an amazing disconnect where they don't realize they're literally part of the problem. They're feeding into all of the design divisions, you know. So that's kind of where I come from, and I totally agree that the only solution is slow, painful dialogue where you put someone in a position where they can't help but believe that you're in good faith, and if they have a position that you are like socioculturally trained to adopt, that person is so good faith over such a long body of work that they can crack through.
Sure, yeah.
And traditionally in person, that's, you know, obviously so much easier. It's made more difficult by the fact that if someone looks like me, like a brown, very educated person, I'm going to have a lot less primacy if I go and like try to talk to like you do with the Change My Mind series. I thought that's probably the coolest thing that I think I've seen you do, because it's, you know, the student that I mentioned that I had interaction with, they have this again, it comes back to the perception versus the reality. Even if you do it as well as humanly possible, where you don't go into any interaction trying to win anything, because that is the worst. You rely on the merits of your knowledge and humanity.
Although there's a lot of other stuff that goes in there too. Like, it's the fact that I already have a big audience, then I can afford to do that, right? Like, if I was a one-off, like a college student going to talk to somebody, and I just lose a debate really hard, I'm not going to convert anybody long term because I don't have a platform, I don't have a body of work to refer people to, I don't have an online presence to constantly put in front of people's faces. So being big already helps. There's also a lot of other rhetorical strategies that go into like how I talk to people, the different platforms that go on, like the aesthetic that I present on Twitter as being like kind of hardcore or kind of like edgy or whatever. There's a lot of other stuff that plays into that as well.
Yeah. I mean, so another one of the wrinkles is your audience, you know, I mean, a given person's following, they may not substantively reflect the epistemology, the approach of person being followed. I mean, just as this is one example, it's anecdotal, but like the Mark Lamont Hill conversation, I mean, I'm very used to online discourse and it doesn't bother me, but it was pretty fucking brutal because it's just like basically it's the classic thing where like, you know, the comments that are being made toward Mark where it's exactly the vapid ignorance of like, oh, this guy's this person's a trained expert in this area. And once you gave him kind of the flowers, the chat was like, oh, you know, I've respected him for a long time. That might just be the nature of the medium that's completely unavoidable, and that there's like a selection bias there with the most vocal people. But like coming back to my student, that's what I think is so interesting is their perception of you. Despite that, I mean, in my opinion, the narrow area within the larger trans debate in which you have concerns, I have the same concerns, and I think they're plausible beyond plausible and reasonable, and to characterize them as transphobic or bad faith outright is ironically the worst, the most bad faith thing someone could do.
Yeah, I think. But I think it also, to some extent, it helps me a little bit too, because if I am big enough and if I do get in front of those people, like the wider the chasm that exists between who I am and who people present me as, like ends up helping me, because then the shock factor is all the more when somebody actually does watch my content. Like if right now, if you're online, like, and I'm sure there are some people, I haven't identified them, I don't know if I can find them, but I'm sure there are some people that watched me debate Cenk or watch me debate Ryan Grimm who think that, Destiny, that's the guy that can't find Israel on a map. So then if that's the case, then when I debate any of these people that supposedly have all this knowledge, historical knowledge about Israel-Palestine, and they get absolutely fucking trounced because they have no idea what they're talking about, then there's a huge dissonance there between, like, wait a second, I thought that this guy thought that Assad was the leader of Turkey and that Erdogan was the leader of Syria, and why the fuck did this guy just completely fucking totally obliterate my guy who I thought knew everything but didn't know anything past talking about? It's like the window between who I'm presented as and who I actually am kind of helps me sometimes too in certain conversations, yeah?
Yeah, I mean, I totally get it, and I guess, and I got to go in a minute, but the reason I key so much on the in-person, like the in real life college events you've done, which I respect a lot, because there's no hint at all of bravado. It's just conversation. You give people, even if they really don't know anything, I think they're really, really good conversations. And I guess one of the questions that I have, and maybe my students or students on campus would have, is it possible for someone who's primarily online to stay tethered to good faith over a long period of time without those kind of grounding events? I mean, there's very few people that I perceive online to have little, if any, susceptibility to like audience capture. I think Sam Harris is another one. But if for the mere mortal over a long period of time, it just seems like how do you stay authentic in terms of the good faith approach, and where on that wheel is the cog of talking to the very impressionable, usually very self-assured, without much life experience, 18 or 19-year-olds.
Yeah, I mean, you just have to. I mean, I think
view you as being in that role or not.
It helps to start from a really principled position. Most people don't. Most people have inherited morals, inherited beliefs. So if you've been especially one political belief your entire life, sometimes that could be indicative of somebody that's going to have a hard time being principled in their approach to politics. If you change heavily, though, that's also indicative sometimes, because people will get reactionary to whatever they grew up with. I don't know. I think it comes down to, like, I think it's super easy when you talk to somebody and you ask them, like, hey, what do you do to prevent yourself from getting like audience captured? What do you do to prevent yourself from getting like too dug into one hole? I think it's really easy when you ask somebody that question and see how they respond to see if they actually have a way of escaping that, or if they're always locked in there. So for instance, the most common answer and the most indicative one that somebody is ideologically trapped in one area is when you ask somebody, what do you do to prevent yourself from being too biased or to be ideologically in a hole? And they'll say, oh, well, I try to read media from a variety of sources and publications. That person is always ideologically captured, because that answer is dog shit. It shows that they've never thought about avoiding ideological capture, and it doesn't even address the question of, like, well, how do you avoid it? By reading a variety of sources. Lots of people read a lot of variety of things and still believe a certain thing. Like, what a stupid answer. So, like, there are ways to test for it. You have to ask people.
That sounds like the "I have a black friend" response.
Basically, it's the "I have a black friend" of how do I stay politically like principled and not just like follow down a rabbit hole like one political side. Yeah.
Yeah, so I mean, overall, what I would say is I'm really interested in that dynamic of online, and because in real life, in the old model, that you didn't have. I would be shocked if you or anyone who was prominent online denied, the undeniable dopamine hit or temptation or pull of views, followers. I mean, it's undeniable, and the extent to which you've been able to carve out the same trajectory of following or views and not having to own people, all of that kind of thing, and the nature of the medium, the nature of the discourse, and how it's accompanied by or sits alongside people's real life perceptions of you, particularly my students. That's kind of primarily my interest, much more so than any particular topic. So I got to run, but I'd love to chat about some kind of event along those lines, and we can keep talking offline or whatever.
Okay, sure. All
right, cool, man. Thanks.
Have fun. Bye.
Enjoy.
Yep. Wow. Okay, heads up also, if you're a YouTube viewer, watcher, or if you watch my YouTube videos, I am perma-hiding you. That means you're forever muted on my YouTube comment section. If there are any more comments about like black women or BPD or whatever, like all these, it's like the same, or Desi, that's a woman's name. It's been like years now. It's so unfunny, it's so stupid, and it clogs up like all of the comment sections on every single fucking video. Yeah, so heads up, be careful on that. Ooh, another one from 3 hours ago. Hide user from channel. Really quick, super short, good vid. Should have linked it in Kick Chat. Fucking loser. Hold on, I need to
Drug addicts are
get
weak.
a drink real quick. One
I'm
second.
currently developing an addiction to methamphetamines just so I can show everyone how easy it is to quit.
Wow. It's an interesting way to self-teach.
It's a win-win. Either I kick the habit, which I will, and we could all stop glamorizing recovering addicts, or I could spend the rest of my life in a motel smoking crystal meth away from my family.
Like you're really just doing just for the struggle.
Sorry, what the fuck did you say? Drug addicts are...
Okay. Hold on, let me use the bathroom real sippy source real quick. 1 sec. Alright, give me 1 sec. I'll be right back. You can talk to my audience. Hold on.
Hello, chat. By the way, the Discord overlay was bugged, and a lot of you thought that I was the other guy, but I'm not. This is me. I'll wait till he gets back, because everything that I want to say, I want him to hear it too. Thank you. I really appreciate all the support in the chat. A few people very kind and gave me compliments. I'm not good at solo entertaining, sorry. For asking for that. No, I don't watch One Piece. Top 5 video games of all time. I'm a RuneScape 3 player. Enough said. Yeah, I do know who Luffy is. No, I'm not going to give you guys the satisfaction. I know what you guys are asking me to say. I'm not going to say it. Suffer. No. Yeah, I don't know what's with my mic. Something's wrong with my Discord setting. Like the gain on the mic is just awful. Yeah, I have the sensitivity all the way down. For some reason, it still puts me as really quiet. No, I don't have a Twitch. I don't have. Well, I do have a Twitch for like chatting, but I don't. I don't actually stream or anything on anywhere. If you want, you guys can follow me on Twitter. I don't know if I should. Am I allowed to plug Twitter like while he's away? Is that going to be seen as a? Is that a breach? Yeah, I don't think I'm allowed to do that. If I do it, I'll do it at the end. I don't want to potentially break a rule. I just want to say, DGG, there's so many Israelis in the server now. There's so many Jews in the server now. Zog has not occupied the government, but they have occupied the DGG server. It's been harder than they've occupied the West Bank. DGG is Israeli territory now. DGG.
Hi, I'm back. Okay, what's up? What do you want? What are you doing?
Okay, sorry. So, a few things. I have to correct from last time, or at least things that were misunderstood because of the way that people have been giving the feedback in the chat.
Okay.
So, Severalizer, I'm not sure I'm pronouncing that name right, but he kept saying, like, oh, Umar didn't expel the Jews from Jerusalem. Umar allowed the Jews to come back. But the thing is, I never said that Umar was the one who expelled the Jews. I said that his conquest of Jerusalem, later after that, under the rule of the Muslims, you had displacements and expulsions of the Jews over the subsequent centuries that diminished the Jewish presence. Just for example, obviously this is a much later one. You had the 1517 attacks in Safed, in Hebrew it's Tzfat, but that's the city. You also had like the 1834 one, that was before Zionism, all this, and also the 1077 expulsion of the Yeshiva of Jerusalem by the Seljuks in 1077. So, like, those are just a few examples offhand throughout each period. I never made the claim that Umar expelled the Jews. There's just one more correction I want to make, because I literally misspoke like 4 times, and it triggered the hell out of me.
Okay.
Like the Qassam brigades, like Hamas has the Qassam brigades.
Yeah, like you're talking about the military arms or the militant wings of these groups or whatever.
Yeah.
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 The
Exactly.
Al-Qassam brigade.
It's named. Yeah, it's named after a guy called Iz ad-Din al-Qassam. Yosef Abu Dura. This is the guy I was saying earlier. He was not a Druze guy. It was not a place. I literally glanced at my source on the monitor while I was just coming on stream, so my heart rate was a bit up. But no, he was a Palestinian who was born in Syria. He ended up in modern Palestine. Hamas named again the brigades after him. And he raped and attacked multiple Druze villages, attempting to, steal their houses, desecrate their holy sites, just because they weren't Muslim. That was in the 30s, and him doing that is what pushed the Druze into. Yeah, so I'm really sorry about misspeaking earlier, but
Okay.
Yeah, those are the few things that I wanted to say. Now, I want to talk to you about Iran. You keep saying this thing of any peace deal would require. I think everything that you say that a peace deal would require is just never going to happen. Even if you I know you're saying that in good faith, but they're not going to do those things. Part of it is the intransigence. Part of it is bloodlust. Part of it, there's a lot of things that go into it. But I just don't. I'm very, very black-pilled on that possibility of ever happening. Should I talk about the settlements first, or do you want to talk about Iran? I know I asked you that last.
Whichever one you want, go for it.
It's kind of intertwined, I guess, but I'll start with the settlements. Do you understand why many right-wing Israelis, including myself, would say, why should we give up the settlements, considering the way that things are? When we give up the settlements, we just get attacked further. If we give up the high ground to the West Bank, we'll just get attacked even harder.
Yeah, I understand that. Happened in Lebanon, happened in Gaza.
Yeah. Well, what settlements were there in Lebanon?
I'm saying that once the Israeli army retreated from Lebanon or pulled out of Lebanon, that Hezbollah expanded into southern Lebanon, and now you have Hezbollah there now.
Yeah, okay. But I just thought you meant there were settlements there.
No.
Yeah, I can understand now. Yeah, I got you. So one of the concerns is that coastal strip. If you look at Ukraine, for example, Ukraine has a lot of defensive depth, which means that the Russian army has to traverse a lot of land, and they can defend even if they're pushed back significantly. The coastal strip of Tel Aviv has absolutely no defense. It has negative defensive depth. And if any foreign army, it's not just the Palestinians attacking us over the West Bank. If the Palestinians were really smart, what they would do is they would accept a two-state solution. They would bring all the Palestinian refugees back into the West Bank, and then they would help a foreign army march to the edge of the West Bank overlooking the coastal strip, and they would annihilate us there. And when you say Israel is not under existential threat, if we gave up the West Bank, we absolutely would be under existential threat when we don't have control over our own, you could say topographically natural borders, if that makes sense.
I understand what you're saying, but then I think what that would look like there is some sort of security arrangement with a two-state solution, where the Palestinians are given, if you have your own control of the West Bank, there can't be the presence of foreign armies here. And I think Jordan and Saudi Arabia and Egypt and Israel would all collectively want to reinforce that idea, right? And it's not like Syria is in no position to march an army through through the West Bank. I don't think Iran is in a position to start marching armies down there. Like,
it wouldn't be Syria itself. Yeah, it would be a regional power invested in the destruction of Israel, like Iran. And once you cede military control of the Jordan River Valley, like, you basically open the door. They can guarantee themselves, oh yeah, no foreign military will march. But like when they're close and their goals align, like, do you really think they're going to enforce those parts of the terms?
no, but I think that internationally there'll be enforcement. Like, if there are armies of people moving into the West Bank where a two-state solution has been concocted, like, not only would the United States and Israel be highly opposed to that, I think the entirety of the Gulf, maybe even like Egypt and other North African nations as well, I think would also be like very much like, hey, you guys need to not fucking do this. You're going to destroy everything that we've worked on for the past like however many years in this region, I think.
Part of the problem is that a lot of the peace that you talk about with like Egypt and Jordan is a very cold peace. And the Arab street, as they say, does not accept the existence of Israel and is still extremely hostile. And even the leaders are kind of forced to appease the populations as a result. And they can't even really be like openly pro-Israel. So this is why I just don't trust a lot of these countries in the region to actually enforce any kind of lasting peace with these kind of terms with us and the Palestinians. Do you understand my paranoia about allowing like ceding any kind of control?
Sure, I understand that too, but I'm sure that like the opinions of those that walk the Arab streets are going to be heavily influenced by the protraction of the Palestinian conflict as well, right? That's still like a sore point that is going to continue to feed that negative opinion. And if that gets solved, let's not be delusional. It's not going to change opinion overnight, but it would at least go to easing some of those tensions, I think, no?
In terms of like the immediate inflammation of hostility, like you see these, they recently destroyed like a synagogue in Tunisia over the war in Gaza and all that stuff. Sure, that immediate kind of, but that would subside. However, the feeling that you still don't belong here, you shouldn't be here, and if an army were to march into Jerusalem and like exterminate most of you, they'd like celebrate in the streets. I don't think it's ever going to go away, to be completely honest with you. At least not for like centuries.
I don't know if I'd say centuries. I do agree it might take like decades. It might take a while. Like a couple generations maybe, but yeah, it's hard to say. But
like politicians all over the Arab world, including and Muslim places that are not Arab necessarily, like even if there's something that is not going well for them, they'll just throw like Palestine or Zionism or Jews into the speech, and it'll like get a lot of cheers from the crowd.
Yeah, of
like,
course.
It's such a deep part of their cultural identity to like hate us and that we don't belong here. I don't like to use the anti-Semitism word, but I'm talking about like there can't be an organic peace as long as these attitudes are so deeply rooted, and any kind of enforcement of contracts that we talk about, like I don't trust the countries in the region to do it, and frankly in the long term I don't trust America to do it, because like there could easily come a time when America has like its own things to deal with internally, they start rolling back their involvement in the Middle East, and even if they want to do something, like you understand why we can't trust foreign powers to like manage our own security.
Let's say, like, I understand there are challenges along this path. What's the alternative?
The alternatives are, well, you're not going to like this maybe, but just disregarding a lot of Palestinian aspirations and just telling them you can't have what you want.
Sure, I understand that, but I'm asking let's go from most extreme to least extreme. So the most extreme, genocide is not, obviously we all agree that would be stupid.
It's not going to happen.
Yeah. Let's say mass expulsion or mass population transfer. Gaza, they give them $50 billion and they ship them into the Sinai, and Israel expels everybody from there. And then the West Bank, if you want to stay for citizenship in East Jerusalem, there's a path there, but everyone else gets like expelled to Jordan. Do you think that mass expulsion is ever tenable or possible?
So here's what I do think. I've thought about this a lot.
Okay.
There's always going to be like this changes over time. I think what you can do is certain elements, not the entirety of the Palestinian population, any elements that are like openly supportive of terrorism will get deported in some way or mass transferred. And that already serves as a warning to anyone else. Like if you try anything else, it's not just like, oh, I think a lot of things that Westerners don't understand about Palestinians is they are willing to die in the tens of thousands. They are willing to even have like most of the houses in Gaza destroyed. In 40, 50 years, it's what I was talking about, that concept of stage of weakness. in 50 years, like, okay, we'll go back to the north, we'll rebuild, we'll still have the Gaza Strip, the status quo won't have changed. Like, they are not really deterred by even something like the current war unless it involves some kind of long-term loss, like part of the Gaza Strip being annexed, or Rafah being annexed, and the Gaza Strip being stripped, like split into two with Israeli military control in between the two parts.
Don't you think, like, what about the drop of support for Hamas more in the Gaza Strip than the West Bank? Isn't that a little indicative that the people are like, okay, well, this kind of sucks?
So I think that is a strategic disagreement with Hamas. That is like, or an ideological issue, where like, oh, clearly this war was bad for us, yes. But in the long term, this ideology will resurge in support the moment that there's like peacetime and stability again, and you see that the cost for like aggressing against Israel is not taken that seriously.
What about like an Oslo III, where it's not just an agreement to hand over territory to the Palestinians or whatever, it's this would never work. This is a retarded idea. But it's an agreement that's also paired with a threat, where it's like, listen, we're going to slowly transfer territory over to the Palestinians, from C to A and B over the next like 5 years. However, if terrorist attacks or certain government, infrastructure to support terrorist attacks is maintained, then instead Area C is actually going to grow. We're going to take territory back, and there'll be some way to measure this so that there's like a high incentive for surrounding Arab states and Palestinians to try to enforce like a no terrorism policy or no support or cooperation with Israel to control those elements. Do you think a plan like that could ever work, or do you think that would just be seen with hostility, and that's just like insane? And
I think it could work now. If your deterrence policy was every terrorist attack, every rocket, another settlement is going to be built, another like few hundred houses, you would see terrorism stop very, very quickly. Like another neighborhood in Gaza is going to be annexed every time that you like do something big. You will see terrorism end tomorrow. I guarantee you that. No one is willing to entertain these kinds of solutions because they don't want to consider what the actual Palestinian psychology is. The Palestinian psychology is when they lose land, that is a real. The Palestinians are kind of like. They're like I'm not trying to be inflammatory by saying this, but I'm just trying to make the psychological parallel. I'm not trying to draw the moral evil comparison, if this makes sense.
Sure.
They're kind of like if the Nazis were never really finally defeated in World War II. And they held on to hope that, like, as long as we maintain the cycle, you even said this yourself, they still think that they can fight, right? So they have never experienced, besides the Nakba, they've never experienced like another humiliating defeat about losing land since 48.
Sure, although I would say that another issue relating to the Palestinians that changes their situation from the Nazis is, I think that the issue with the Palestinians, I feel like this is a big contributing factor, like maybe even over 50% of their mindset is all of the external and international spiritual support that they get. Whether that's from the UN, like from UNRWA, whether that's from all the resolutions, whether that's from the surrounding Arabs. I feel like that's one of the things that keeps the hope alive for the Palestinians. Because like I said before, I think Israel was forced to reconcile with not only their dreams and hopes and aspirations, but also like the political realities on the ground. And kind of going along with what you said, Palestinians don't ever really have to confront political realities. Like they're allowed to remain delusional and live in a fantasy land. Like the idea that it's unbelievable, the idea that people in the West would support a people whose territory launches tens of thousands of rockets at another country. That's just like in any other circumstance, that's just like an unfathomably insane fucking proposition. It's unbelievable. But for the Palestinians, there's like excuses or reasons made. Like they live in a concentration camp, apartheid conditions where not a single person had died of starvation prior to October 7th. Not a single person. These guys have been living in unlivable starvation for decades, and not one person has starved to death, who are given infinite excuses to act in whatever way and then never suffer any real losses or real political defeats as a result of that. I think that's a really big problem. So like I think the Nazis, if they were defeated but were allowed to remain in power, I don't think the territorial aspirations would have necessarily stayed because they wouldn't have had that support. Although, to be fair, I don't know how wise Hitler would have been as a political leader. Maybe he would have tried stupid shit anyways. I'm not sure. He was only in charge for like 10 years or something. I don't know how much he would have pursued regardless, but yeah.
No, I completely agree with you, by the way, about the external support. That's why when like Biden or Western leaders condemn Israel, that is, you might not realize this, that is a hope. Oh, what we're doing is working in the international diplomacy jihad. The jihad of the media is working. It's like another kind of jihad beyond the violent one specifically on the ground, because they know they can't defeat Israel in convention.
And also all of the intentional comparisons to Africa has been like an obsession with Arafat being Mandela, apartheid from South Africa, winning like the ANF did against the Algerians, or in Algeria to kick out the French. Like that comparison as freedom fighters that are at some point going to expel or dominate these other factors has always been a big part of the narrative of Palestine as well. Yeah.
So if if you say, like, even without mass expulsions, I would say just expulsion of just the terrorist elements, and frankly, and their families. I'm sorry, there's in this culture, I could explain why that's important, but it would have to be like they're like, I don't know how you say hamula in like the tribe or the clan, like the whatever. I think you understand what I'm trying to say.
Okay.
If you expelled those people, which is not even like a majority or a like, we're not talking about hundreds of thousands of people. We're talking about like thousands of people maybe. You expelled those people so they couldn't instigate, and other people saw if you ever tried to do this, this is what will happen to you as well. If you said like any time there's a new terrorist attack, there will be a new settlement like annexed as part of Area C, and you will lose that land forever, and you're never going to get it back in any lasting peace deals. And if you said like, and if the West completely said, we're not going to like condemn Israel to make it convenient for you. We're not going to. You can't. These things are even these things. I'm talking about like the minimum, and even this is probably unrealistic. I'm just telling you what I like after thinking about it for a long time. What is realistic? If you saw that, then you could actually have stability and peace. And by the way, there's this big like misunderstanding that they're fighting because they don't have political rights. They're fighting because they live under like they don't have rule over themselves. All over the Arab world, all over the Middle East and North Africa, most people don't have rule over themselves. Most people have no political rights. They have even less political rights than Palestinians. They don't even have like that kind of autonomy, self-governance.
Well, we got to be careful. Another Zionist, tried to play the trick. I think you have to be careful. Like when people are talking about political rights, they're talking about the political rights of the entity of Palestine, not necessarily a Palestinian. So a Palestinian living under a dictatorship might see themselves as having more rights than a Palestinian in a democratic society in an occupied territory. Not to say that they live in a perfect democratic society, but I'm saying that, like, I think there is a legitimate argument to be made there that a country that is independent under a dictator has more political rights or self-determination than an individual that lives in occupied territory that can still vote.
No. I'll push back on that.
Okay.
There are entire minorities in Syria and Iraq that don't have political rights, and they live under a dictator that doesn't even represent them as an entity.
Which aspects are we talking about here?
I guess, like, do Assyrians have any real say in like what goes on in the Iraqi government or the Syrian government? Like, I could be wrong about this, to be completely fair. But like the Yazidis, how much political representation did they have? The Copts in Egypt, like, did they have any representation? And you don't see them like doing what the Palestinians do.
Yeah, I really do think that the international support changes things dramatically. I think it's like a 51% or more contributing factor to why they are the way they are.
Yeah, exactly. Like, and that's why the statements of condemnation against Israel. I understand that, like in the West, there's we have to hold Israel to standards. We have to be principled. We can't allow Israel to like get away. But it's the exact opposite is true. And I see, actually, I really like Dylan Burns on Ukraine, but I see him kind of like falling into this trap all the time. Like, oh, it's because the West is being unreasonable, and people around the West, like, it's actually because people see the West conceding to these tactics, and like they try them even more because they know that they work and they'll get away with it. He's not the only one who does it. It's just like an example I can think of at the top of my head of this kind of like flawed thinking about the Israel-Palestine conflict. And you see this like even I have my own problems with Bibi Netanyahu, but he says when he's interviewed very often, the real genius of the Abraham Accords was bypassing the Palestinians and saying like, actually, we don't have to have a peace with the Palestinians to have peace with the Gulf. We can have peace with the Gulf first. And it's kind of like the Palestinians got very angry about that. It's like, what the hell? Like, what, you're giving something to the Israelis without consulting us? That's not
sure. But I mean, like, that methodology or that ideology started under Begin, right? The idea that
event are you referring to?
I think they called it capsule theory. Begin's idea was that you could negotiate bilaterally with countries and just skip the Palestinian problem completely, which turned out to be correct. Yeah.
But the Abraham Accords was the first time I would say this has been done on this level that has been like actually put to practice. So I think if you are willing to, rhetoric matters a lot. You're not a world leader, but like world leaders' rhetoric, if all the European leaders basically said, listen, Palestinians, like, we're not going to blame Israel for anything until you stop your terrorism, you would see a very different tune. It's like, oh, hold on, okay, maybe we'll stop this terrorism. You saw like every time, there's a new settlement and we'll recognize it as the West. Like, oh, hold on, okay, we won't do any more terrorism. And you'll see the situation stabilize very, very quickly.
Yeah, I don't know about stabilize quickly, but I do agree it would change the calculations on the ground significantly, right? That when the world says we don't recognize East Jerusalem, when the world says that the occupied territories are illegal, when the world says that, Gaza still lives under a complete and total occupation, the blockade is illegal, like when you feel like you have all this international support, and then now you feel like you're being genocided, you feel like you live in an apartheid state, you feel like you're in concentration camps, the idea is constantly like, well, what fixed concentration camps? It was an invasion of Nazi Germany, right? What got rid of apartheid, right? I mean, like it was the ANC and Mandela and all this international effort and support against South Africa. You know, what got rid of the genocides and what, like, it's always international condemnation. It's anything that can possibly be done to remove the responsibility from Palestinians. That's what all of these terms and everything does, and it hypes up. That's my saying where I say, like, it drives up everybody's expectations to unrealistic heights for how the situation is going to resolve itself. And the reality is none of those things are going to happen, but everybody keeps making people believe that is what's going to happen. Yeah.
And by the way, once that stability is achieved, I agree with you. Once that stability is achieved, I would be completely fine now talking about economic development and like regional integration and making life actually materially better.
Thanks, Illuminator, for the 5 gifted subs.
That. But until people, I have this friend, not going to name any names, but he like keeps sending me like maps of like potential two-state solutions. Like maybe if we, like none of this really matters until, because you actually have, people don't realize this, in Europe you have many of these like enclave arrangements, weird land territorial stuff, Kaliningrad, in Poland, France, Germany, like after World War II, no one kills each other over these things. But it's really the resentment and the hatred and the like revanchism and the hope that we will eventually get our land back that fuels the conflict. It's not a specific border. It's not like, well, they have this land here and we have that land there. It's like, it's the overall mentality, and once you destroy that incentive structure, peace would be relatively easy. And by the way, I'm not interested in like making the Palestinians' lives hell forever, or even expelling them if it's unnecessary. Like, we can share this land, but it's not going to be under like the Western model. Like in the Western model, people think everyone has to have democratic rights. You can't necessarily do that in the Middle East with its history, with its. And the other thing, by the way, and I know you already agree with this, but I'm going to give you like an extra rhetorical point to use with apartheid in the West Bank. You kind of have to look at like intention of when the system was set up. If Israel like was seriously willing to negotiate West Bank back for peace, like giving it back to Jordan, then the entire thing of intention doesn't really work either, because it's kind of like a band-aid on top of a band-aid that was applied, like all these Oslo statuses, Area C, Area B, Area A, different passports, like the PA, this stuff. These kind of occurred as a result, like, oh, we kind of ended up in this situation due to the wars and the annexations and the peace treaties or lack of peace treaties. It's not like these things were set up to marginalize a particular population. I think it's like another point that you can make.
Sure, yeah, there's a whole bunch of ways that the apartheid thing fails, yeah.
Yeah. I guess this is why, like, all this, everything that I've explained to you is why I actually think, it sounds counterintuitive to the way a lot of people are programmed to think about the conflict. Getting rid of settlements is not the solution to the conflict. Actually not condemning them and threatening to continue them as long as violence continues from the Palestinians is actually the quickest way to solve the conflict. And that's why, as an Israeli, I don't support, full disclosure, I do vote for like Smotrich's party. I don't agree with everything that he said, to be clear. I think he has said some things that were not okay. But the overall approach that is, at least on paper, I know like you have a more nuanced understanding, but like when you go and say like, you know, Israel needs to stop the settlements, whatever, in practice that is not actually the approach that is going to work or solve this conflict. It's been tried for like a million years, and you see what has happened also with the existing peace deals.
So what does the final resolution to the problem look like, though?
There's a few. First of all, I do happen to like the Emirates plan that was brought up on stream, and you said like, oh, Palestinians will never accept it. Part of the reason they'll never accept it is because they have hope that's more on the table. But if they're like, at least this will give us autonomy in our local towns, they would be much more likely to accept it. That's kind of the point.
I just don't feel like there's any like modern nations that are conceived of in such a way.
First of all, there's no reason that nations can't be that small. Like on paper, there's no reason this can't work. It's just like, yeah, we have to get creative, because I think this conflict is not really has there ever been a conflict like this? Like
no, this, probably not. Yeah.
You've seen like
everything is really unique.
Relating to another solution that's considered. Exactly, yeah. Another one that's kind of considered is, I don't really know what the logistics of this would be, but they could get like Jordanian or Egyptian citizenship while getting residency in Israel, and they could like vote with joint administration for things like infrastructure and education with Jordan and Egypt, and that would be more complicated, I think. But that is another thing that people propose, like solving West Bank and Gaza without any kind of expulsion.
Would you oppose if Jordan, let's say hypothetically, Jordan re-annexes like 98% or 95% or whatever with land swaps of the West Bank? And they run.
Yeah, I would be opposed to that.
Okay.
Yeah, because there is like a 3-state solution where Egypt annexes Gaza and Jordan annexes the West Bank. One, I don't think Jordan wants that, but let's say they did want that.
Yeah.
So putting that aside, the problem is the same thing. Jordan is not a strong state militarily. It would be kind of like Assad's Syria in terms of any bigger regional power invested in the destruction of Israel would like be able to march an army up to the edge of the West Bank, with or without the consent of Jordan in practice.
Okay.
or like fund proxies, not even necessarily, it doesn't have to be like an actual conventional standing army. Like you can funnel weapons in through Syria, through Jordan, and then you have like the quote unquote resistance going forever. You see like Hezbollah is kind of like a gun to our head this entire time. Like only recently they've even started like getting active because of the whole Gaza conflict. But the destruction, the goal being the destruction of Israel, has never stopped being the case. They call the Houthis, Hezbollah, and Hamas like the ring of fire around Israel. The moment Israel does anything, well, now we have like an incentive and an ability to escalate. And this is like their coordinated strategy. It's not like they're just doing this of their own accord. And right now Iran is that big regional power. And I do want to talk to you about Iran, which is like the second part of this.
Sure.
But I think.
Okay, yeah.
You understand like the skepticism of like getting rid of settlements or a two-state solution.
Yeah, I mean, I've always understood I'm sympathetic to the skepticism. Yeah, for sure. I think something I've said historically is I think that one of the huge problems with the Palestinians is they've just never had a really strong leader to guide them into the 20th century, let alone the 21st century. Yeah, it feels like they haven't had that Sadat figure or some like really strong secular leader who's willing to take some political risk, some personal risk, and actually try to iron out something with that would result in a permanent settlement. Yeah, yeah, it sucks, but I don't know what else to say. Yeah.
And if Israel did get all the land, again, without expelling the Palestinians, without some kind of, with one of those like alternate solutions that we talked about, you would actually see like, okay, well, this didn't work, and we decisively lost. Any local uprising would be crushed, especially the territorial contiguity is like a key thing. Once they can build tunnels in an area, once they can entrench themselves among the civilian population, that is a really big part of the problem with Hamas, which it wouldn't really be possible under like the 8-state plan. It wouldn't be possible under like the lighter version of the 3-state solution, where they're citizens of Jordan and Egypt, but Israel still controls the West Bank and Gaza, or like the settlement annexation threat. Like a lot of the problems, because Israel doesn't really have an interest in just like going in and brutalizing Palestinians for fun. These things happen under the current circumstances. I even would say that in some cases they can be excessive in individual cases.
Yeah.
Even that a lot of that is overblown, because like you go, it's like, oh, they did a raid on a home. It turns out like that guy was a terrorist. It's not like just some random person. There's no incentive to do this for fun. But a lot of those problems would like go away. The West kind of has to just grow like a little bit of a moral backbone and just say like, listen, like, you're not going to get a state. Like it's never going to happen, and we're not going to condemn Israel in the way that you want us to. Unless, obviously, if Israel does something really, really bad, like it starts genociding them, sure. But like the conventional, normal aspects of like urban warfare that Israel routinely gets condemned for, like it has to go away, or else we'll never solve it. I know it's very self-interested and convenient for me to say that, but you understand my reasoning.
Yeah. I mean, I understand it. Yeah.
Okay, can move on to Iran, I guess.
Go for it.
Wait, just before I move on, will you still say that settlements are bad and like they should be dismantled and everything?
I mean, I still feel like the solution that you're proposing. I think that there's a higher chance that Palestinians are going to come to the table with a good faith solution than the entirety of the West is all going to, like, in conjunction with one another, change their mind on how to approach the Palestinian problem, right?
Okay.
I mean, I agree with you philosophically. I do think it's like very difficult. I think that there's a lot of reasons why it's very difficult, and I agree that there's a lot of reasons why Israel might not necessarily feel comfortable allotting 2 states to a group that still defends rocketing Israel constantly. Like, I understand that there's a reason why this conflict has gone on for so long. Yeah.
And you also see, like, I hate the whole role of like the NGO Hamas or NGO terrorist complex, where they're all like ready to condemn Israel before Israel even retaliates past October 7th. They're like, the response is going to be disproportional. They have their contacts in the media. I mean, they have the whole arm of like Al Jazeera as a propaganda tool and all that stuff. And like this kind of superstructure that exists in the UN and UNRWA and all, well, I don't know if UNRWA is still going to exist, but all these international organizations, it kind of perpetuates this particular framing. Like, okay, I guess Palestinians are going to have to die and Israel's going to have to be condemned for it over and over and over, and like, oh, we love seeing dead Palestinians. It's like this cycle, and the West has to be like, if we don't want this to continue, we're going to have to change our approach to it. And the current way that the West approach is going, again, I'm not saying it will never change, but if it doesn't change, if we just continue, okay, then the Palestinians are going to remain in Gaza after this war. They're going to be administered by who knows what. The West Bank is going to stay as it is. This conflict will, 50 years into the future, it will continue. We'll still be here. Our grandkids will still be here, and the conflict will continue. And
I wish something that would have happened that would have been interesting is like, I wish Syria would have performed better in the early wars and would have like taken over or captured up to like Haifa or something, because I think that people have, it's weird because I think people have this opinion that if Arabs would have captured territory that had belonged to Israel, they would have given it back. But that like would have never happened. It would have given Israel a slightly stronger claim. If they wouldn't have overperformed so much in the 67 war, maybe people could see things a little bit differently. But
Sometimes I have this temptation as well to be like, well, sometimes I wish we would like lose more, and then people would finally say that like our paranoia is justified. But then like October 7th happened, and you just see them like denying the rape and saying it never happened, and the IDF
killed most of the people, and
so it wouldn't even actually help in practice. Like, I understand that feeling that you have, and I've kind of had a similar thought process, but it doesn't, in practice, it doesn't actually work. It just gets them more excited about killing more of us. So. I'll talk to you about Iran.
Do you think, real quick, if Palestinians, so I don't understand why this happened, but if Palestinians were to start actually investing in like education and infrastructure and like developing an economy, doing stuff like that, do you think that more Palestinians would become like the Palestinians in East Jerusalem, where they become a little bit more invested in just like getting education and doing other stuff than constantly fighting for ancient territory? Or
I would say the even bigger yes, but even more so than that, Israel would really be forced to give them a state, even because of internal political pressure. If in 2005,
this is something that I say all the fucking time, and everybody, all the pro-Palestinian people always disagree with me. But yeah, I think that
it's not true what they say.
Yeah, like, the biggest weapon is if the Palestinians were to just like drop all the rocket terrorist bullshit and were to just be like, you know what, we get so much fucking aid, we're going to start investing in schools, we're going to get educated, we're going to do economic shit and do that. I think that there would be dramatic external, and fuck the external, like you said, internal pressure from Israel to finally do like a two-state solution or to grant major concessions to the Palestinians. But the constant endorsement of terrorism and the constant endorsement of like all of the intifada and all of this rationale makes it so that like Israel always has a reason to say like, well, fuck that, we don't trust these people, we're not going to do that. Yeah.
Like, if one thing that terrifies me so much, I don't think this is going to happen, because I think they just really can't like keep their bloodlust in their pants. I hate to say it, there's no other nice way to say it.
I don't like the bloodlust thing, but go ahead.
Sorry. No, but it is like when you see the speeches that they get up and give, it's not like there's literally a quote from like Hamas member. He said, "We are thirsty for blood, and the best blood is that of the Jews." I can show you the video. I'm not making that up.
Sure, I understand you, but I mean, like Israeli leaders, and probably if you're voting far right, I'm sure they've made there have been some pretty fucking unhinged statements that have come out of Israel. Like a lot of those ICJ statements are bullshit, but some of them are pretty true, and some of them are pretty indefensible. So I mean, like,
but the difference is even that is like a fringe of Israeli society that gets routinely condemned by the majority, whereas in Palestinian society, it's a mainstream like a majority, and no one even like blinks twice about it, and no one has like, so there's a massive difference there.
Yeah.
But what were we talking about? Oh yeah, my biggest fear, honestly, is that Palestinians would engage in like the ultimate taqiyya and be like, yeah, we're just interested in economic development. They would put all the rockets down. They would build Gaza up to be like this. This is a cliche, but like a Singapore or whatever. And then once they were economically developed, they'd say, listen, we're a peaceful state. There's no reason we can't have a conventional army like anyone else. And then they would go at it with us. That's like my worst fear.
I understand what you're saying, and I think people have fears of this. I don't think that's possible. So like, for instance, when people say something along the lines of like, oh, well, this group is moderating, they're moderating their beliefs, but that's just to get more popular, and then they'll become extreme again. I think that I don't know if it's ever happened in history where a group of people moderates their beliefs so that they can massively expand in size with all the people that they capture with the more moderated beliefs. If that group of people were then to become like really extreme again, I think most of the people they picked up would leave. They'd be like, wait, what the fuck? Did we get tricked? Like, I don't know if you would have this society where, okay, it's taqiyya time, we're going to do all this, and then, 30 years later, you get all of these, Palestinians that are graduating schools with degrees in engineering and shit, and then the parents are like, okay, we've done well, now it's time to engage in the serious war, and we've been like fucking with Israel the whole time. I think a lot of the younger Palestinians would be like, wait, what? This is fucking retarded. We're just going to keep doing this. That's what I feel like would happen.
To be clear, I don't think they will actually do this. I'm just saying if they wanted to engage in the ultimate long-term strategy against us, like that's what it would be. But this is not going to happen. Like,
sure.
That's why I'm presenting it as a hypothetical to say that if in 2005 Gaza... By the way, when I asked Palestinians, so why didn't you do that in 2005? Why didn't you economically develop? And they said, well, you were still building settlements in the West Bank, and they were still occupying Al-Aqsa and like doing raids on Al-Aqsa and whatever. So it's like, so you can never actually... There's always like an excuse not to develop, and for like Israel is evil and we have to fight Israel no matter what. So we can never have peace, really. Like if there's any kind of harm that happens to Palestinians anywhere, regardless of what instigated it or what happened before, there's like this kind of complete dismissal of context with Palestinians. Like they'll show people getting shot in the West Bank, and they will be like, okay, but he was a Hamas member, like planting a bomb or something. It's like, well, it doesn't matter. Israel's killing Palestinians. Like, okay, so we can never have peace. Like we can literally never have peace.
Sure, there was the really popular one. I wish I could remember this more, but it was some like 15-year-old that got locked in jail, and everybody was like so sad that it was a 15-year-old shot. But I think the video that came out was like the guy ran up and tried to either stab a woman or stab a soldier or something. Do you know who I'm talking about?
It was an 8-year-old with 2 cops, unless you're thinking of a different incident.
I don't think it was an 8-year-old person. I think this one was a teenager, but there might have been another instance of this happening too. But
yeah, there is one with an 8-year-old, and even I saw it. It was an Israeli Arab police officer yelling at him in Arabic in the most aggressive way, and I was like, oh, this is really bad. Like, and then I looked into it, and it turns out he and his brother stabbed 2 cops.
Oh, okay.
It's like, yeah. Unless you have anything else, I'd like to talk about Iran.
No, I think that's it. Not to Israel dick ride too hard too, but it's funny, like from a personal development thing, I always say that like there are some people that do things in spite of, and there are people that make up excuses like because of. Like for the people that are really successful in life, oftentimes, assuming they weren't born into it, people will do things no matter how difficult it is in spite of these conditions. They'll still, they'll go to the library every day, they'll go to the gym every day, they'll do whatever. And then there are the other kinds of people who are like, oh, well, I can't do it because of this, or I can't do it because of that, or there's this excuse or that excuse or blah, blah, blah. It is interesting that this is a major dick ride statement, but like Palestinians always have a reason for why. Well, it was the occupation, or it was the wars, or it was Israel cross-border attacks, or blah, 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 blah. Meanwhile, for Israel, I feel like they had every excuse to fail from 48 onwards. Like it was constant wars. It was huge waves of immigrants that brought no money or anything with them. It was lack of support from the West, but they still managed to assimilate a fuck ton of people, take on a fuck ton of immigrants, grow their economy in an area that kind of doesn't really have much for natural resources or arable land. There's a huge difference in mentality there. Yeah.
This is, I guess, I know this is like a circle jerk now, but one of my problems is like I'll read the history of Jews or Zionism, and I see the conditions that we lived under in some cases, which was significantly like more brutal. You look at the blockade that the British had on the Zionists, like during the 20s and 30s. It made the blockade in Gaza look like a complete joke, and yet we like still tried to develop despite that. But now like the blockade, which literally just stops weapons from getting in, while concrete and building materials and a bunch of stuff we're still getting in to Gaza, that's seen as like an excuse for why you're still occupied and you have to fire rockets. And it's like, okay. I'll move on to
wait,
Iran
real quick before Iran. Hold on, another guy came in. He wanted to chat.
Yeah, I have a few things to talk about regarding what you said.
No
because
problem. Go ahead.
From what I've heard, you have the right-wing view of how Palestinians are, and it's like one for one, man. It is incredibly bad. One thing, a lot of your points are refuted by the Palestinians that currently live in Israel. You're saying that there's no way that the Palestinians in the West Bank could possibly live peacefully if they were given a peaceful, a fair solution. That is not true. The Palestinians, like the biggest motivator for violence from Palestinians is not what happened in 48 or 67 or the past. It's current conditions. And you can look at the Palestinians that live currently within Israel that have way better current conditions compared to the Palestinians that don't, and you will see that significant drop of hatred of Israel and the significant drop of hatred of Jews, significant drop of violence as well. There is a lot of violence between what's it called, Palestinians within Israel itself, but that's against each other because of socioeconomic status.
Wait, to be really
no, there's
clear,
still plenty of terrorism from Israeli Arabs, but I do agree that they're much more friendly to Israel than West Bank Palestinians.
Yes, but socioeconomic usually, and usually their families in the West Bank. The ones, almost every incident I've looked into where there was an Israeli Arab that committed, and usually were not the ones that were directly involved. They would be a getaway driver or something. And a lot of the times, Israel does, well, not Israel, but a lot of the news headlines would immediately label something a terrorist attack, even though it was like a gang killing as well. So you would have to look into those incidents rather than just label every incident where an Arab Israeli attacked someone and say it is
not attacks someone, attacks a Jew, because the gang ones, like,
not
Arabs kill
necessarily
each other in Israel, but that's different.
Yes, but there's some. Well, here you don't know the situation with the gang violence in the north. Then
no, I do. It's really bad. Like, there's a lot of crime inside Arab society.
But Jews are getting killed now from it because a lot of the
I'm
Jewish
not talking about
crime.
I'm excluding that.
Why would you exclude that? That's a part of it. A lot of people would label that terrorism because a Jew got killed by an Arab.
No, that's not terror. I don't see that as nationalistically inspired terrorism.
But that's how the right wing paints it. If an Arab kills a Jew in Israel, it is almost immediately, always exclusively labeled as terrorism. Always.
I agree that you have to separate like the motive depending on the case, but in the case where they're like firing into a shopping mall or driving a vehicle into a crowded area, that's not gang-related things in the Galil. That's like.
And of course, there's some obviously, and I told you, I've almost every incident I've looked into where an Arab Israeli was involved, I've seen that he was a getaway driver, so they were planned on getting away, or they were usually a smuggler. They smuggle people in, and they weren't directly related to the attack, committing that attack. They might have the notions to cause harm to Israel in that regard, but usually they're not the direct respondent. Regardless, the numbers are way fucking lower, right? And not that the numbers are way higher, like excluding October 7th, of course. Regardless of this, you talked about, there was another point you made, which was...
No, just wait, hold on. But you're arguing something I never said. I never said that like Israeli Arabs are like all the violence that they do.
No, but I'm telling you, this disproves your argument about the Palestinians in the West Bank would never go for a peaceful solution or agree to a peaceful solution with the settlements being pulled out. doesn't make sense. We were harmed by the Nakba as well within Israel. Where obviously there's systemic racism. I don't know if you would agree with that because you are right wing. A lot of the right wing.
No, I think in every society there's like what people would call systemic. I think it's like just how you want to semantically label it. Sure, Jews don't see Arabs the same way that they see Jews. Like, yeah, there is like social discrimination. I would never deny that.
I would say it's also just the government has vague laws that let social discrimination happen at a much higher frequency than a lot of other countries. You could probably look into it a lot. There's an organization called Adala that looks into it.
I know, and when you deconstruct a lot of them, like I think I don't want to get into that right now. But
I want to get into the point.
The West Bank versus Israeli Arab. I'd like to talk about that because that's like the actual important.
Do you know the difference between them?
In terms of one has citizenship, one can vote, etc., and then one of them like doesn't really have any political rights. Yeah.
Is there any cultural differences?
Yeah, there are definitely cultural differences.
What are the cultural differences?
When you say culture, do you mean like the food that they? I'm not talking about things like that. I mean like their attitude towards Israel.
Their attitude towards Israel was not always positive, was it? Israelis.
Even within the West Bank and even within Israel, you have wildly disparate attitudes. Like you have one tribe in Hebron that's very friendly to the Jews. You have one tribe in Hebron that like hates their guts. So like even this is obviously in the West Bank, way more of them hate Israel. But there's this spectrum of how Arabs feel towards Israel, both inside the West Bank and inside Israel. So it's not just like how they're treated or what political rights that they have. It's also the relationships that they build with Jews and like their socioeconomic status.
Okay, do you think it's easier to build relationships with Jews once you have peace or not? Because the relationship with Jews in the West Bank is either settlers, which obviously a lot of Palestinians don't fucking like, very understandable why, and IDF soldiers. That's the.
But it's not. By the way, I agree with that. Like there is that. But it's not just that. There's also like factories in the West Bank run by Jews where Palestinians work, and it's like pretty peaceful. A lot of the kind of the positive relationships between settlers in the West Bank and Arabs don't really get talked about because it kind of undermines the narrative that everything is just hostility and everything is like. There's even a terrorist attack happened where one Arab worker killed either the Jewish manager or he killed a Jew in like this factory that he worked on, and you had other Arabs, West Bank Arabs, saying like this is terrible. This like undermines our cooperation with the Jews. Like we like
of course I know about
this represents all the Arabs, but I'm just saying like
regardless, what I'm saying is when we talk about Palestinian terrorism, excluding October 7th, because I would view that as like a terrorist operation rather than a terrorist attack. That is like a wide fucking scale operation. There was 3,000. That was an army invading Israel.
Wait, what's your broader point? Sorry, because I'm actually losing sight
My broader point is that you cannot say that the Palestinians will not approach a peaceful settlement with Israel when Israel comes to them with an actual idea where they're gonna remove the settlement because they're innately gonna hate Israel. That's not like the existence of Arab Israelis that way less frequently commit attacks on Israeli Jews showcase that there is a chance for that to happen, and there is a chance for Palestinians in the West Bank to change their mind, and they would change their mind. I've seen it, and I've seen it again, and I've heard it from a lot of Palestinians. I'm Palestinian myself. You said you've been in the West Bank several times, right? And I assume you've been around. Yeah, I assume you've been in the West Bank in the settlements, right? I don't think you've been in Palestinian areas or villages.
No, I would be terrified of that. No, I would not go there.
Okay, right. I can go to both the settlements, not all of them, because some of them would actually fucking lynch me. Or I would, and also been to almost every single Palestinian area in the West Bank except for Jericho, which is Ariha. That's the only place I have not been. And it's usually the most peaceful place because it's like far away from all the settlements and far away from like I think IDF don't really enter it either. Regardless,
can I address your main point, or if you want, you can go on.
I've been saying my main point. You cannot make a statement about Palestinians will never be open to the idea of peace with Israel because of the past when it's not about the past.
No. So
hold on. Wait. Hold on. Wait. I don't. Wait. I'm curious to differentiate this because you keep saying Palestinians in Israel. When you say it's not about the past, isn't it about the past? Because when we look at Palestinians in Israel or Arab Israelis, aren't the ones that are living there peacefully just the ones that happen to be on the territory that was conquered in '48?
There was attempts to remove them as well, though.
Well, possibly, depending on which population we're talking about. But when we're saying, like, if we go to the past, it's not like when you say there are 2 million Arab Israelis, when there are 2 million Arabs living in Israel, these are Palestinians that have, like, moved to Israel and peacefully, started to assimilate into the society. These are the people that just were always there.
Yeah,
pretty much the leftovers. No, but the Haifa, pretty much the Haifa leftovers. The Haifa leftovers. You probably read the history
Sheva,
on that.
Galil, whatever. Yeah.
Yeah, I understand, but the implication being that we can expand that opinion into because those Arab Israelis that live peacefully within Israel borders are living in proper Israel borders. The implication being that if they were to annex Gaza or annex East Jerusalem formally, or internationally, whatever, or annex more of the West Bank, do you think that the Palestinians living in that territory would just suddenly start getting along with
the conditions get better, even if it is like under Israeli sovereignty and they're just residents, they will automatically start fucking getting less violent.
So here's a question that I have, and I can't know this, obviously I don't live there, but I feel like what you're saying is what I read a lot from other people that live in the area or from people that talk about this area is there's a fundamental underlying Western assumption of the Arab mind or the Palestinian mind that they're just like Western people and that like, well, as long as the economic conditions are good, everything will be fine. And I don't know if that necessarily, but that's essentially what you're saying, right? Well, if they get...
that's not essentially what I'm saying, but they are people. And like the proof is like, what, like, again, I asked him what's the difference between me and a Palestinian in the West Bank. The difference is that the conditions I live in is way better than the conditions that West Bank Palestinian or a Gazan Palestinian lives in. And also, I have not just that I don't have this hatred for Israel, I also have way more to lose. The Palestinians in the West Bank, they're not given much to lose, and they don't have much to lose, much so with the West Gazan Palestinians. And it's not just like not hatred for Israel. They will have hatred for Israel moving on forward. It'll take time for that to dissipate, but if they have actual good lives to live, any person, it doesn't have to do with your Western or Eastern or Middle Eastern mindset. Any person that is living a good life would be way less likely to throw that life away. Would you not say so?
Several, can I answer this directly?
Go on.
So for a lot of people, yes, they would be incentivized to hold on to what they had. But you see that in Gaza, the situation was, and again, you can say like they had restrictions on their movement, life wasn't perfect, sure. They still had, in terms of a lot of metrics, like a very decent life compared to most Arab countries, and they still did October 7th despite that.
Well, here, you say they still did October 7th. Again, how many people went? Well, here, I'm not going to use...
No, we're getting there. How many people did it compared to the overall population? That's what you're going to say, right?
Sure.
So the answer is, and this is what I was saying earlier, maybe I wasn't making myself clear, it really only takes a very, very small faction of people who are violent to ruin the peace for the overall majority, which is why I proposed the idea
then why don't you care about violent settlers? Like,
first of all, I am not okay with any settler who unprovoked goes and attacks a Palestinian. But we have to understand...
that ruins your whole idea, though.
No, it doesn't. Just I'll address it.
It does.
If you look at the and I will source this if you ask me to. You look at like within the same period, there were 60 settler attacks, and there were like 1,400 Palestinian attacks at the same time. And the settler attacks are overwhelmingly condemned by almost everyone in Israel, even a lot of right-wing people. So the notion that these things are in any way equivalent, I think they should stop. I think the IDF, any settler who goes and unprovoked does violence against a Palestinian for no reason, like it wasn't retaliation, it wasn't this, like
even if it is reality, that's vigilante justice, and it shouldn't be justified.
Fine. Okay, fine. Then if it's, I'll include that as well. I'm just trying to say any clear-cut case of like unjustified aggressive terrorism by settlers against Palestinians, I condemn it, and the IDF or the police or whatever should absolutely arrest those people. But the notion that it's like equivalent in terms of the obstacle to peace or the broad scale of the conflict, it's just not true.
Well, but then what's your metric for justification for attacks? Because there's Palestinians that do terrorist attacks on settlements and settlers. Is that not justified? They're literally infringing on their freedom of movement and freedom of life.
So if it's just when you say freedom of movement, do you mean
yes,
like
their movements are restricted? Both me and you know that if you've been in the West Bank.
I've been in the West Bank, but I don't know everything about all the road layouts, to be clear.
Well,
but I don't necessarily think like. I don't really think they're thinking about that. Oh, my freedom of movement is being restricted. Like when you go into the family of a house, and this has happened many times, you just like slaughter the children and the mother and father. I don't think you're thinking like, oh, these people are restricting my freedom of movement.
Of course not. This is an evil person that's like here. It's gonna be weaponized by evil people, and it's also gonna be fucking used by people that aren't evil that are pushed to do this. For example, that guy that slaughtered a fucking family. Do we know if his family was slaughtered? Do we know if his family was killed? That's the thing. if there's a guy that had those conditions, obviously it doesn't make it fucking right, but it's not, it's suddenly, it's like, oh, it's only because of freedom of movement. These conditions that are set in the West Bank open up to more discrimination and more abuse and more dehumanizing to the Palestinians.
Thanks for the 20 bucks, Deuce, Obi.
In the, like, you might know about these checkpoints. You
Yeah,
might think, oh, it's just, you might know it's just, oh,
been
longer
through the
wait
checkpoint,
times.
yeah.
But it's not just longer wait times. It's searches. It's like insults. It's beatings. It's violence. I have Israeli citizenship, and I go through some of these checkpoints, and I have never been through a checkpoint back into Israel without being stepped aside and questioned for like 40 minutes, even though I'm an Israeli citizen.
Okay, but hold on. The beatings and all those things that you're talking about, that's not like a regular every time. That happens.
It's not.
Sure.
Well, hey, you could say it's not a regular thing to a person, but as far as I'm aware, it's a daily occurrence.
It's also not just done
The
indiscriminately
abuse.
to random people. It's like there are situations where they get aggressive at checkpoints.
But they
and
are
a lot
not
of-
allowed to get aggressive unless there's a threat. They're supposed to just let people through and check, and that's it. They're not supposed to be violent or insult people or anything. Like
I know Jews, I know settlers who have also been like insulted and questioned, and treated in a hostile way. Like the IDF it's not the best friend of the settlers,
Of course. Why I want to know why? Because the IDF is the one putting their lives on the line to protect lunatic settlers that want to live there for either religious or ideological reasons.
I think we're losing sight of the broader point is, listen, I want stability. If you're going to try to equate the attacks by settlers on Palestinians and the attacks on Palestinians against like all kinds of Jews, there's no equivalence in terms of which authority should be in charge of all
How many
the
Jews
land.
do you think die a year to terrorist attacks, excluding October 7th, for example?
I don't know the number off the top of my head.
The numbers from 50 to 60, as far as I'm aware.
And what's the number the other direction for
The
settler
other
attacks?
direction, I think it's around 20 to 30.
I
depends
would
actually
like
on
to
the
see
year.
a source for those numbers. Maybe you're right.
Well,
I
the
don't know off
source
top
the
of my
source
head.
of the Jewish test is from the Jewish Virtual Library, and even then, they also count attacks within Israel that are terrorist attacks among the attacks on settlers. So
I think all these statistics, like they get mentioned, and all these disparities get mentioned, but at the end of the day, which entity ruling over like the entirety of the land will actually lead to stability and the Palestinian any kind of authority? I'm not saying the Palestinian authority specifically, but like any
this
kind
goes
of
back
Palestinian
to the
entity
other
ruling
guy
over the
that-
land will not.
I understand, but this goes back to the other point that the other guy was making the other day. You guys don't want the peaceful solution with Palestinians. You don't want coexistence. You want domination. You want Palestinians under your fucking boot. That's it. Like that's
Under the
beyond
current
unfortunate.
circumstances, with the way that the Palestinians are, and yeah, I do want, I guess you could call it domination, because I don't see another way.
But
If-
that's
listen-
exactly my point. Don't paint it as like coexistence and you can.
Oh,
Have
I know.
that opinion.
I never said coexistence. So here's the thing: when you
peaceful
talk about
resolution, you said, or like a peace plan or something.
see, there's
along
two.
those
When
lines.
Palestinians say they want a peaceful resolution, a lot of the time what they mean is they don't want us here, and then there will be peace between themselves. But when you talk about like, I'll give you a counterfactual that will explain why it's not really just about wanting to dominate for fun. You know the Druze, right? The minority of
Okay.
Israel. They have very good relationships with Jews. They have their different national identity.
Do you know why?
I'm not exact. Yeah, I know why. I actually mentioned it earlier on stream because of what happened in the 30s, and they sided with the Zionist militia
No,
against Palestinians.
that's not just.
They also don't have national aspirations to the entirety
They're
of the land.
religious.
Yeah, they don't believe they should have a state. Yeah.
No, it's not just that. It's
Go ahead.
their religion. Within their religion, they are obligated to be nationalistic to the country they live in. If you go to Lebanon, and see that the Druze there are super fucking despise Israel. Why? They're Druze, the same culture, same religion. But no, it's that country, the country they live in matters because of their religion. The reason.
But it's also the history that they have with the.
Sure, the
Lebanese
history does
Israel,
impact
yeah.
it, but the religion is the main
Yeah.
contributor to Druze's motivations to being pro-Israel. Like, why are Bedouins pro-Israel? For example, a lot of the
Not
Bedouins.
all Bedouins, but yeah, a lot
Not
of
all
Bedouins.
Bedouins. The Bedouins in the north are not pro-Israel. The ones in the south, well, actually,
Yeah, because they were
depends.
killed and raped on October 7th, and
No,
they
that's
understand that the
bef-
Gazans will even
That's
before that. You're gonna
not
say, yeah.
It's in 1948 Bedouin tribes fought with Israel,
Fair.
so it's not because of October 7th. And
No,
it's
but I'm
also-
saying that's solidified. It's solidified it for them. Like, if we can't side with the Gazans, they hate us. They're gonna kill us if we.
But
don't get
here,
the chance.
Opulent, my point is here, the reason you have, I'm gonna say it, a racist view of Palestinians here. Whether you
No,
think
no.
it's
I have my view of Palestinians is informed by talking to hundreds of them and trying to understand how they think.
where
That
do
is
the
informed.
where do the hundreds live?
So some of them were in the West Bank. I would say the
You spoke Arabic?
no, of course not. But some of there are Palestinians in the West Bank who speak English.
Yes, and majority of the ones that speak English have a fucking very well. Here, that's the thing. The ones that speak English usually live abroad and then come back to visit.
In
Majority
some
of them do
cases, it was
not.
those people. Yeah, in some
Yeah,
cases, it was those people.
majority of them do not speak English. Majority of them speak Arabic, and they
But
speak a little
to be
bit of
fair-
Hebrew because they work in Israel. That's the two languages they usually speak. Very little English, and it's not good enough to have political debate with them. And
A
I
lot
think
of them
this
have
is
been
evident.
diaspora. Go
Yeah,
on.
but I think their level of English is evident in the Ask Project. Have you seen the Ask Project?
Yeah, I've watched a lot of their videos.
I mean, obviously it's anecdotal, but the Ask Project, like the highest level of English you would there, because the education system is fucking trash, is like I would say a fucking middle schooler in like a Western country. Like that's the highest level of English you will there. It's not good enough to have a political discussion about. And I'm sorry to tell you this, but I have political discussion, and I've seen the hatred you've spoken about, but it's not as commonplace as you think. A lot of the stuff that I mentioned for their hatred of Israel is current conditions. It's not 1948. Once you keep going into the conversation of why, and why, they'll eventually leave 48. But the one that's immediately on their mind that will radicalize them is current conditions. And
you can tell me if I'm. Oh, go on.
And another point you put on is like you said it's
No,
not.
hold on. I'd like to address this.
Okay, address this first.
A lot of them, like this is a little bit going. This is going to be a little bit of a caricature what I'm about to say, but I think you'll understand what I'm trying to say. Like they wake up, they think about the Nakba. They go to sleep, they think about the Nakba. They eat lunch, they think about the Nakba. Like this is such a central part of their consciousness and identity that like we were kicked out and we want to get those lands back. This is not like
hold on, but do you know when the last time like me and my Palestinian friends spoke about the Nakba?
Well, maybe if you don't bring up the conflict, I guess like it doesn't come up as much. But in all the not all, but like in so many, or even a majority of the conversations
Then
I had, it feels
that's
like this
because
is so
you're not.
central to the
I'm sorry, but
grievance.
that's because you're not. Here, there might be an influence because you are an Israeli or a Jew or something along those lines that they attach you to what the Nakba is, and that's why it's brought up to you a lot. When Palestinians talk among themselves, the Nakba is rarely brought up. They're normal people. I don't know how much I need to address this or talk about this. Palestinians are people. Jews are people. Israelis are people. All of them are people. They act like how you think other people act within your circles. Unless you're Nazis, of course, which I heard you make that comparison, which was fucking wild, by the way. Actually,
No, I was just doing it in terms of the willingness to fight, not the moral.
They don't have that willingness to fight. If they had that willingness to fight, they would have fought when it was most important in 1948.
The elements that do want to fight, like unless they're brutally crushed, they will continue to fight forever. And you can say it's a minority of Palestinians. That's fine. But then if we had a two-state solution, basically, what would you would have? You would have to have like an Assad-style ruler. I mentioned this earlier, who literally like the moment that anyone tries to fire a rocket or tries to do terrorism or anything like that, he would just take them and like execute them. Like that's the only way that you could have some kind of stability in a two-state solution.
Well,
and I
no,
don't
you
think
need-
that you'd really be okay with.
You don't need someone as extreme as Assad to rule Palestinians. You need someone that actually doesn't abuse his power as a Palestinian leadership, that takes advantage of the foreign aid coming in to help Palestinians and pocket it. And you need someone that actually leads Palestinians to a better future. You don't necessarily need a fucking dictator or someone that will literally be even more suffocating than Israel for that to succeed. Again, a lot of the opinions, and I've also seen this happen among Israeli Jews on polls, a lot of the opinions about negativity of a solution comes from hopelessness, and their opinions change dramatically about what's currently going on. I've seen what's it called about a two-state solution. You can say that it's a solution at all is completely out of the question for Israelis after October 7th, right?
For the most part, even across the center and left, it's minority opinion. It's minority support, yeah. Majority of Israelis are against the two-state
because of what
solution.
happened, and that's understandable. That's a human fucking response. Again, for Palestinians, when they constantly see they're fucked over, they're gonna be have a hopeless response to these polls because they don't fucking see it happening. If you show them that it can happen, their opinions will immediately change. If they see hope, they'll fucking grab onto that hope. Just like other people. I have to stress this: they're just people.
Okay, they're just people, but let's not pretend that like culture and history.
Well, hold on, wait. I think something even more important than that. They're just people. Like, I don't disagree with that. I think that's true. I think that some of it might be a response to conditions and everything. But I think the issue is that they're just people only ever seems to apply to one side. I think the issue with the international framing and the Palestinian framing is that Palestinians are just people responding to Israeli occupation, but Israeli people can never be responding to the Second Intifada. They can never be responding to, the 48 war, the 47 civil war. They can never be responding to 73 that war. They can never be responding to Hezbollah and the Houthis. Like, for Israel, when Israel kills Palestinians, it's because they're bloodthirsty rat dogs who just want to murder and see Palestinian children killed. But when Palestinians commit October 7th, it's because they're oppressed people responding to the apartheid genocidal concentration camp conditions forced upon them by the Israelis. I feel like there's only ever one-sided understanding when it comes to talking about this conflict on an international level.
I agree with you there. I actually agree with you. I'm not a retard like the fucking Western Palestinians that live in the West, that live like fucking eat cheeseburgers every day and then be like, oh, Israel bad. I'm not like those people. I actually think the war on Gaza was justified because of what happened. I obviously don't like all the Gazans that are dying, although apparently Hamas has lost significant numbers. I can only hope for after this war happened, they can get rid of Hamas so they can have a better future ahead of them in Gaza.
Sure, but like that position is already what you've stated. I think that most people, I want to be really careful about this. In the online communities that I hang out with and the pro-Palestinian crowds that I hang out with, the opinion that you just gave would make you a far-right Zionist. If you believe that the war in Gaza is justified, you're already like on the right of the Zionist spectrum.
Palestinians.
Well, that's because I'm gonna say it again. They're idiots. A lot of them are
Sure, but
idiots.
careful, because you just accused him of being racist by generalizing all Palestinian opinions, but now you just seem to be agreeing that most Palestinians are idiots when it comes to Israel justification for war.
No, not majority of Palestinians. I said the ones that live in the West, that the ones don't really experience what's going on.
Wait, West Bank Palestinians think that this war is justified?
Not Western, that live in Western countries.
No. Oh, okay. No, but hold on. But we were talking about like the people who we actually were going to have some kind of peace arrangement on the ground with is the West Bank Palestinians, and you said I'm generalizing them too, like.
But yeah, no, you did say that there's no possible way they would ever accept a peaceful solution with Israel, and it's because of the past, which I've told you from my conversations, and majority of the Palestinians, they don't obsess over the past as much as you want. If you ask them about the past, they'll talk about the past. But if you talk about what would get them to go for a solution, it is current conditions. And like, again, I will bring myself as an example and the people I live with, the Palestinians that have Israeli citizenship, they have too much to lose for them to be hatred of Israel. They also do not suffer from under Israel as much as Palestinians. Like, they don't suffer under Israel to the point where they're like, oh, it's all Israel's fault. Israel's the bane of all evil in the world, whatever the fuck. It's just a dumb mentality that like gets you nowhere. But when you are constantly under like, I'm not gonna say constantly because the West Bank, it is bad, but it's not as bad as people make it out.
I think. Well, hold on. Wait. I would also challenge this too, because I think you have to be careful, because like that pervasive idea of Jews that permeates like really the entire Arab world. That's not unique to the Gaza Strip or the West Bank.
Oh yeah, I
right?
agree. I think that I honestly don't fucking understand the hatred of Jews from like other countries. They're like fucking. It makes no sense to me, because when I talk to them, they even seem to have more extreme opinions than Palestinians on Jews, which like doesn't make sense, because like when I looked up the anti-Semitic. What's it called? Metric, I think. Palestinian territories ranked the highest. But when I talk to Arabs from other country, except for the Gulf, I think the Gulf, they really don't really like talking about Jewish people, or like they don't like voicing their opinions on Israel, from what I've noticed. But the majority of them, when they talk about Israel or Jews, they have more like negative opinions about them than Palestinians, which goes into what we talked about last time, Destiny, which is when you have less interaction with a group of people, you are more likely to demonize them. So, like I said, Palestinians in the West Bank, some of them do have interactions with Israelis because they sometimes work in Israel. Sometimes they have decent relationship with settlers that live near them. It's not all settlers that are fucking like deranged, and that's why like the solution I propose a lot to people when they ask me about it, obviously I think it's unlikely as it is now, is like an open a two-state that goes into the steps of having open borders, like a confederation like the European Union, where they can have open borders so the settlers don't have to get kicked out of their homes.
Sure.
Can I
Also,
ask you-
real quick for both of you, because I have to. I want to jump tonight, so I have to leave kind of soonish. But I have to respond to all this Candace Owens stuff today. And this is like taking way more time than I thought. So if you want, I'll give you guys like 5 minutes to wrap this up, and then you can come back tomorrow. We can chat about it tomorrow too. But I need to.
Destiny, can I talk to you about Iran tomorrow?
Yes. Yeah. If you want to, you can come back tomorrow. You both have roles for this room, so you can always just jump in. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate that. So just several like. Can we please like refocus? Because you've said a lot of things. I don't even disagree with a lot of the things that you've said. But the problem kind of happens where, even among the many peaceful Palestinians, let's say the West Bank gets statehood tomorrow. Obviously, it's not going to happen. Like the West Bank gets statehood. A Palestinian politician gets up and talks about like the pain of the Nakba and how we need to reclaim the 48 territories. You think that will have like no?
That would be considered incitement. Yeah, no, it would have an effect, absolutely. Because here, at the end of the day, groups like Hamas. That here, when I say that, like a lot of the Palestinians don't think about like the past to go to cause violence or to commit violence, it's not all of them. There is absolutely Palestinians or absolutely even Israeli Jews that would think about the past to commit violence. Absolutely. I am lucky that my village, we have a past that was bloody with Israel, but I'm lucky that there's very few from my village that have ever committed attacks because of the past. So there's going to be groups like, for example, do you think the KKK still exists in America?
Yeah.
Yeah, obviously.
But it's not the same. It's not the same.
I understand.
The picture of Palestinian society that you're painting is an extremely optimistic and rosy one. Like overall,
but you might look rosy to you because you have a right-wing perspective on them.
It's not just right-wing. Even a lot of center and whatever Israelis, like after being exposed to more Palestinian rhetoric, they kind of see this for what it is too. It's not just racism. If Palestinians were Druze, you wouldn't have the same kind of like, yeah, we can coexist, we can have binationalism, we can have
are you saying like? Are you saying
they have different attitudes? Palestinians don't have the same attitudes. You're like,
because Jews weren't what's it called? Jews weren't victim to aren't currently victim to a lot of oppression from well, actually they're still oppressed like victims, but again it goes back to
I think like again all these things that you said are true. They don't really change the broader point, which is that you can't have
domination. By the way,
with this. Yeah.
Why do monarchies fall? Because you dominate a population for too fucking long. Monarchies
it's not only that, but sure.
Yeah, but that is the main driving force, is that you constantly suffocate the population by force. Dominating the Palestinians for your peace will eventually fall and create more violence than you originally tried to subdue. Unfortunately, that is the truth. And when I say these solutions and when I say my ideas for these things, it is because I don't want Israelis to get hurt either. I don't know if you know, but I don't know if you heard me multiple times say, I have Israeli citizenship. I'm a Palestinian.
I know, you're a 48er. Yeah, I know.
Yeah, I'm a 48er. I have Israeli friends. I have Israeli Jewish friends. I have Palestinian friends in the West Bank. I have people that constantly are in danger because of the violence from both fucking sides. I don't want anyone to get hurt. Obviously, that's too optimistic. And even in this war, thankfully, I didn't lose anyone from October 7th, but I've had friends that lost people from October 7th. But I've also had people that I knew personally in Gaza that were fucking blown to bits. Unfortunately, but that's just the
Do you have family in the West Bank or Gaza?
I have family in the West Bank. They're a bit close to Ariel, but I do not have family in the Gaza Strip, thankfully, right now at least.
Do you think that even you, as an Israeli Arab, won't you be seen as like a traitor by most of the Muslim world?
I voice my opinions all the fucking time to everybody. I never change my opinions, even in front of my family. There's some opposition to some of the things I say. For example, when I trust an IDF report, they never trust the IDF, which I understand. From my village, we should never trust the IDF. But I always look into what the report is, and if it's likely, according to my intuition most of the time, so I might be wrong sometimes, I believe it, and I say to my parents, I believe it, they will say that I'm crazy for believing it. But it's not necessarily...
Basically, what I hear from you, I believe that you are sincere at the very least, but you do not represent the overwhelming majority of Palestinians that I've spoken to. But it's not just hold on. It's also the sentiment that I see online too. Like it's not just who I've spoken to. Just when I see someone like you, I know that you're an outlier. You do not represent the majority.
I mean, here I had this argument with David, and I proved to them that I am. I'm not the majority, but I'm also not the minority. I'm like
I think you are the minority.
I would disagree with you because
Okay.
you do not
Maybe
know.
not among Israeli Arabs. Maybe not among Israeli Arabs, but among
I would say
Palestinians.
I am. I would say I am a minority among Palestinians within like the West Bank and Gaza. Absolutely,
But that's what I'm saying.
No,
Okay,
but
you just
Palestinians as
conceded
a
the
all.
point, which is that your perspective is a minority among the kind of Palestinians we actually have to make
But
peace with,
I
which is not
already
Israeli
told you why
Arabs.
my perspective is different than them. Did you not like listen to the whole thing about
I
current
know why your
conditions
perspective
shape?
is different, but I'm saying that we can't make peace based on your perspective being different. Like we
But
have to
you
make
can't.
peace with the people.
Oh my God! Do you not realize the steps towards peace would change their perspective? That's what literally the whole point about me living in Israel, having better living conditions compared to the Palestinians in the West Bank and Gaza, proves that better living conditions means less hatred for Israel, less hatred for Jews. Like it
Yeah, but
makes
we can't just give them all citizenship the way that you have
Well,
citizenship.
no,
You understand
don't
why?
give them citizenship. Give them
Yeah, okay.
have a two-state solution. They have better conditions with a two-state solution. They'll stop fucking blaming Israel for everything, would they not?
Do you think they would really have a better, as good of a condition in a Palestinian state as you
Well,
do? And do you think
consider if they have a proper leader, yes, absolutely. In
okay,
Israel, it
and
doesn't
but
have to be as
what's the
good.
obstacle to them having a proper leader compared to all the leaders they've had in the past who have been extremely corrupt and not like
Uh,
crack down on terrorism?
well, first off, they didn't have the fucking choices. Their choices was either fucking terrorism for some fucking awful reason, and obviously, you do have to have a strong like here right now. Fuck, what's his name? He did he did initiate a few terrorist attacks as well, but
Barghouti, you're gonna say Barghouti, I know.
I, th- I think he's the one in jail. But there's someone that is not in jail that's currently working within the PA who is actually like pretty reasonable, and
Every
he is also called Barghouti. I'm not. He's within the PA right now, and he's pretty reasonable. But he does get fired up a little sometimes, and I would say he's on the level of Israeli politicians with some of those statements.
the problem is that you're basically making us gamble our security on a number of big ifs that have historically the Palestinians have the exact opposite track record of everything that you're saying, and you even conceded the majority of West Bank Palestinians don't agree with you.
And
In terms
okay,
of they don't share your attitudes,
but
and
here
that's why
you're
but
arguing
it
the
will get
same
better.
right
But
wing
if it doesn't
thing.
get better, if in Gaza they had better living conditions and it didn't get better, then it's like okay, well they just didn't have the right leader, or they just
Wait,
didn't
how
have the
did
right
they
this.
have better life
In
conditions?
Gaza they had really good conditions for a long time.
No, okay,
Since the
hold on.
withdrawal.
Would you be okay being trapped in a fucking like small place?
It's not an open air prison. We know the development.
Wait,
We know what the economic
hold on.
prosperity was like.
Can they
Yeah.
leave? Can they leave?
Yeah, they have to get like a permit, but they can leave, and a lot of them were literally
How many?
working
Do you know
inside
the
Israel even
statistic
before
on how
October
many
7th.
permits are denied?
I don't know how many were denied, but tens
You
of
don't know
thousands
the
were
statistic.
granted. Tens of
It was.
thousands were
I can
granted.
tell you. I can tell you right now the number. It was 50,000 workers, and that was permits to work in Israel. They cannot
Yes,
leave.
tens of thousands.
Hold on. They still have to what's it called, go back to Gaza and live in Gaza. They cannot move out of Gaza if they choose to. They cannot move into a different country. They cannot leave to a different country, and the conditions may not be as extreme as retarded people online fucking say.
Yeah, but
they're
Israel
still
had
not that great.
Israel
Like,
and Egypt both had legitimate reasons not to let like you're always like what's it called, erasing the context around these, and then you're saying, listen, just give up this thing and give up this thing and this, and everything will be fine. Their attitudes will change. And then when I give you a counter example of when their attitudes didn't
But you're
change, it's like,
talking
well, it's
about
because of this
collective.
and because of this.
No, you're talking about collective punishment. Then you are
Also,
talking about
they can leave under certain circumstances. By the way, like
what are the certain circumstances? Because as far as I'm aware, they cannot leave unless they
there are
are
literally
sentenced
Gazans
legitimate.
living in other countries. Like they've managed to get the
They've been
immigration papers and
smuggled.
everything to live. No, it's not just smuggling. They leave through Rafah and they go live in other countries.
They usually have to be smuggled. What do you mean? Right now, people are paying money to.
Okay,
leave
not right
Rafah.
now. After October
Well,
7th, it's a different situation. The
Even
point is,
before, Rafah was not like a crossing border. Like the only crossings are usually into Israel, and then they have to leave from somewhere else. The Rafah was usually just to send shit in. It wasn't to let Palestinians out. It was never to let Palestinians out. What do you mean?
if I could show you an example of Palestinians living in the West who went through Rafah, would that like disprove what you're saying?
So how does that disprove what I'm saying? If you're
Because you're
talking
saying
about,
that they
but you're
can't get
talking
out
about
through Rafah.
anecdotal instances of this.
No, it's not.
happening.
It undermines your point that they can't get out
How
through
does
Rafah
it
to go live in
undermine
other
my
places.
point when there's like one or are they? Let's say how many in a percentage per capita, let's say, left Gaza that want to leave Gaza from Gazans to live in the West? How many?
I don't know the number, but the original point that we were discussing is that if their conditions will
Come on, you
improve,
bro.
they'll
You're
stop
being
doing
dishonest just
terrorism.
like every
No, no,
right
no, no.
wing.
If their conditions will improve, they'll stop doing terrorism. But the point is, even in Gaza, you can say, well, they had to do terrorism because they couldn't leave without a permit under certain
They have
circumstances.
to.
Like
Do you
it
think
gets
all?
more and more specific each
Do you
time
think
in
all
terms of
Gazans committed terrorism?
no, but I think it was widely celebrated within Gazan society
Sure, yeah,
and
yeah.
widely
You could say it
supported
was
within Gazan
celebrated,
society.
and I think
Okay,
the
so
celebration are
again, you
disgusting.
completely are losing this point because you said the conditions will improve and then the attitudes
All
will
right,
change. When I show you the
let's.
attitudes have not changed, the condition where the conditions did
I
improve,
can make
and it's
these
like
same arguments. Okay, I can make these same arguments about Israeli Jews, but it's just not right arguments. They're not like painted in reality. These arguments are looking at specific instances, and then we're painting it the whole situation with a broad brush. I
no,
do
you're
want
asking me to gamble based off hope. I'm bringing you actual history and examples,
What
and
do
then
you
you
mean
like get
gamble?
more
You
and more
you
specific.
literally are dual citizenship. You don't have to gamble it in. I'm one gambling.
I'm not going anywhere. Number one, and also
Okay, I
the
don't care if
entirety
you're
of my
going
extended
anywhere else.
family,
I don't
the
want you to go
entirety
there.
of my extended family lives in Israel. So it's like, oh well, I'll
Okay,
go somewhere else, but they'll all die, so it's okay. Like
sure.
what?
No, 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 no. I'm not saying you should gamble, but you're talking
Like
about
everyone
I'm
I know,
gambling my
all of my
peace.
family and friends will die, but it's okay. I have dual citizenship. Like whatever. I don't really understand this talking
Don't
point.
talk about yourself as a gambling, but then you talk
Okay,
about
I'm
your
talking
family.
about the national thing. Let's not make this personal. Like the
Well,
national thing. The point is, we can't gamble our security as a nation as a whole. You know, just for basically promises that are based on counterfactuals that are literally the opposite of what happened.
how are they
That you do not represent the
counterfactual?
majority of West Bank and Gaza Palestinians, and you even have acknowledged that.
Of course I don't, because I don't live like them.
Okay, okay, and the conditions changing
But
did
you're
not change the
ignoring that.
attitudes.
But you're ignoring they. What do you mean? You hold on. You
You
again are
said the
ignoring
majority of
how the
Gazans did
conditions.
support terrorism.
Okay, but the conditions weren't that fucking great in Gaza. How many times do you think that's true? Like, just because there's
No,
one statistic that you
okay.
latch onto, does not mean like
This
what
is
you.
it. It feels like nothing will ever be enough. We're always allowed to support terrorism because the HDI was
No,
not
we're
up to
not
the
allowed to.
level
No,
even
no,
it was
hold on,
comparable
hold
to
on,
most
hold on,
Arab
hold on. No
countries.
one said. Okay, see, like you are arguing like a right winger. I knew this was gonna be it.
One second, Destiny, am I going
Opponent,
crazy here? Like,
listen, is not here.
can you? Oh, he's not here. That's
Okay,
unfortunate.
opponent. I'm just gonna tell you right
Oh.
now. Gazans do not live great, and for you to say that they could leave whenever they want, that is not fucking true. I've
No, I
known
didn't say they can leave whenever they want. I didn't say they can leave whenever they want.
majority of them do not have the opportunity to leave. Majority of them just here. I'll use the fucking
One second,
analogy that
if they could leave, would you think they would stop supporting terrorism?
a lot of they would leave. They wouldn't even have any fucking deal with this. What do you mean? Why would they support terrorism on Israel if they don't live in Israel?
No, I think a lot of them would not want to leave, even if they could leave. A lot of them believe
Some of them are
like staying
nationalistic
and
enough
fighting
to
for their
not
land.
leave, but
Yeah,
a lot of them,
yeah, that's
even the
kind of my
ones,
point.
but hold on, even ones that were nationalistic left during the war, yeah, because people flee war. That's normal. How many times do we have to go over the point that Palestinians
No,
are
I'm
people,
not
and
talking
if
about
there's
war.
war,
I'm
they're
talking
gonna
about even
flee?
before October 7th. Before October 7th, you know
Yeah,
exactly what I mean. So.
I know probably 3 people that has been trying to get their families to what's it called, get smuggled out of Gaza
Before October 7th?
before October 7th for
Okay.
fucking like 2 decades. It is not
Okay.
that easy. It is not
Fine.
that easy. And I don't know where you got the idea that they can just get immigration papers and leave. They can't leave through Egypt because the Egypt
No, I'm
Rafah
not saying
crossing.
it's simple or easy. I'm not saying it's simple or
I
easy,
know,
but
but
there are
even
people who have gone out through Rafah
but I
crossing.
do think you have like false information here. I don't know where you got it, but maybe it's like a right wing Israeli talking about it's like, oh, Egypt
No.
blockades Gaza too. Yes, it does blockade Gaza, but the Rafah crossing was never made for people to go through and out. It was for vehicles to go through in and out for aid and construction and whatnot. Usually like Qatari fucking stuff or like resources and whatnot. It never had like the facilities to let people go in and out. That was never like the Rafah crossing. The
Do you
Rafah
think, one
crossing.
second, do you think for a second that a territory that Israel is literally in pretty much wartime with or hostility, even before October 7th, do you think Israel is just supposed to have like, not an open border necessarily, but even like allowing, what was the number of migrant guest workers again? They're coming in from Gaza into Israel? You said the number, like 50,000 you
50,000.
said?
It
Okay.
was
You
50,000.
think
And
like,
also,
you
it turns
think,
out, hold on, I do have to make something because early on in the war, they did say, oh, they have suspicion that Gazan workers tipped off Hamas on where to go. The Shin Bet came out recently and said, turns out
by the
that
way, that
wasn't
was only 18% of the guest workers. But let's just, I don't want to get into that right now. That was 18% that they interviewed in that Shin Bet thing that you're quoting. But
But yeah, we're going to buy
the thing
off
is,
that, but
even before
regardless.
October 7th, it was unprecedented for Israel to allow that many migrant workers in from an area that it's basically at war with. Like, we have no obligation to allow people in from Gaza.
When you realize
under
that
the
Israel,
circumstances.
hold on, you realize Israel benefits from these migrant workers as well because they take lower paying wages.
I know, but we can also replace them with like migrant guest workers from elsewhere. We don't have to
Have you
get labor
seen?
from Gaza.
Have you seen how that's been going?
With the Indians who have been killed in the north? Yeah, I have seen that.
It's not just Indians. Like fucking productivity levels have shot fucking drastically down because of the language barriers. At least the Palestinians that came to work learned Hebrew pretty fucking quickly, or have already known Hebrew, and they could even then communicate with Arabs that currently live in Israel. The productivity dropped significantly in Israel because of the
This is a
migrant
tangent,
workers.
but a lot of the like Filipino guest workers only really speak English and they get along just fine. But
Yeah, but
I don't want to harp
the
on this too
Chinese,
much. The point is, there's a reason that
because
border
you
was
don't know
closed,
about it.
and it feels like even if we allow the conditions to get better, you always say, well, there's this excuse, there's this excuse, there's the they couldn't leave, or they like even their conditions were not
Bro,
as good
I'll
as they
say
should
it
have
like
been.
right now.
Yeah.
I'm not saying this because
Always
the
an excuse for
Palestinian.
why the majority of us support terrorism, and then like okay,
What
but then
is
I'm
your
not. I don't
excuse?
want to gamble
Okay,
on that.
what is your excuse for supporting settlements?
First of all, the vast majority of Israelis do not support settlements, so even the counterfactual that you're
But you
using does not
support
apply
it.
in the
But you said you're
the reason
supportive
I
of it.
support it. Yeah, I said I support it. The reason I support it is because I think it's the best way to kind of force the Palestinians to give up their national and territorial aspirations in the context of what's going on right now.
You think?
But also settlements, I don't support like going in. I already told you, I condemn any like a random attack, unprovoked attack
Actually,
on Palestinians.
the best way to to make Palestinians give up their aspirations for national and land aspirations, as you said, would be including them in a one-state solution, and it's not like
Yeah, but you know
likely.
why that can't happen.
That's not gonna happen. Yeah, I agree. But the settlements is not here again. I will say it again. You don't know how Palestinians think because you just said that the settlements would be the ones that force it. Like the
Not
fucking.
immediately, not overnight, obviously.
But it's been going on for like since the 70s.
They would serve as an actual deterrence. I think that's the point. Like,
But
if
they're
every
not
time you get a
deterrents. They're
terrorist
just
attack,
meat shields. They're just meat shields for terrorist attacks because they also infringe on Palestinians' movements. Like here, I'm sorry, but people that
there
like
would
talk
still be
about
terrorism without the settlements, and the settlements are
sure,
just they
but it would
absorb
be
it. But if not, then the Israelis inside Israel would support it. That's the October 7th actually proved that even if you withdraw all the settlements, they continue to do terrorism against the mainland.
actually October 7th proved that Israel had way too much focus on the West Bank than Gaza, and they knew Hamas was
No,
a
but we're
much
talking
bigger
about what
threat.
Palestinians will try to do. What Palestinians
Come
will
on,
like.
you know Israel dismissed Hamas as like a threat for a long fucking time now, and
That
I'm
does
not sure
not
if you.
change the intention that they had coming out of the Gaza Strip to do what they did.
Again, well, obviously, I keep telling you that like their living conditions is not as good as you fucking keep trying to say they are, and
I'm not saying they have to be perfect, but it feels like
and
with
also
you,
here Hamas are the
unless their
group.
living conditions are like perfect, they're comparable to a lot of Arab
That's not
countries,
here.
and eastern parts of it were even better.
What's it called?
Life
Well, they're better. They're
expectancy,
better than Yemen. They're better than
better
Yemen
than
for sure.
Egypt. They're better than Egypt in some metrics, even.
Well, no, Egypt is because a lot of the fucking metrics come from people living in the middle of the fucking desert, and like their living conditions aren't great in Egypt either. Like you already know this.
Okay, I need to refocus this. Do you understand my concern? Again, you say that as living conditions will get better. I actually want to repeat this when Destiny gets back before he gets off, because your main argument is as things get better in the West Bank, support for terrorism will go down. The
Yeah,
intention to do terrorism will go down.
yeah.
And when I provide you a counterexample, you find like specific reasons that they didn't have full freedom in the
Because
Gaza situation.
well,
And
I
then
have one
like
thing to say that afterwards. Go on.
okay, and what I'm telling you is, so in the West Bank, they'll find like one restriction, and you'll use that as a justification. Oh, the majority of West Bankers still support terrorism. I think, to be completely honest, that these things are actually irrelevant, and I think you're like trying to bring them as, oh, it's because of this or because of that they support. I don't think it's because they support terrorism because of that. I think they support terrorism because, we'll call it resistance if you want. We'll be super charitable and nice. They support armed military struggle against Israel. Okay, because ultimately they are not happy with just having part of the land as like a permanent status quo. That is the main issue that I have with the
Are
entire
you
like
done?
we can talk about all of these other things that you want, but it
Are
doesn't
you,
change the final
okay.
issue. Yeah,
Are you
go ahead.
done?
Yeah, I'm done.
One of the things, the counter example you keep giving me is just false. And here, Dustin's gonna come here and like he's gonna have to go. So I'm gonna just say this.
I
And we're
really
gonna
want
get
to
on.
restate that for Destiny. I really
All right,
want
did
to
you guys
restate that.
solve it? Are you good?
No, it's getting worse and worse. It's so annoying. Hey, Loner.
I was going to ask for a minute with this dude, if that's all right, Sev.
Here, wait. Are you Loner streamer? Loner box. Are you streaming?
No, I'm not streaming.
Okay.
Can you stream?
What if we all come back?
Keep the conversation go.
Yeah, because listen, there's other stuff to cover. Or if you want, I'll be back probably in like 3 hours because I need to take a break for a couple hours and then come back.
So I can stream now?
Go. Yeah, go for it. Well, I'm not gonna be done streaming yet, but I'll probably take a quick break in like an hour or so.
Because you've been watching, right, Loner?
Just for the last 5 minutes, yeah.
We've been on for a much longer time. But
Yeah.
Can I just sum up the argument for Destiny before he gets off?
Go. All right. Well, I'm not getting off right now, but I have other stuff I gotta cover. But go ahead.
Okay, just really briefly. The main contention I have is like we're being asked to gamble our security on a number of these ifs, and then when he says like he says as conditions improve in the West Bank, you'll see support for terrorism, armed struggle, whatever go down. And I said like, well, in Gaza conditions got better and the support for terrorism didn't go down. And he said, well, that's because they can't leave, or that's because certain conditions were not as good as like. So it seems like there will always be an excuse, which is like goes back to what I was saying earlier. And he says no. He's not. Okay, he can give his own thing, but that's my summation.
What I said is the counterexample is you're given is like, here. Do you think I'm gonna ask you straight up a question, and then if you answer me like wrongly, I'm gonna like lose my mind. Do you think Gazan Palestinians live better than the West Bank Palestinians before the war?
I'm not 100% sure, to be completely honest with you. I would imagine it depends on the neighborhood for sure.
Well, it doesn't. Well, yeah, of course it depends on neighborhood, but the overall majority of them live worse than the overall majority than the West Bank, and that proves my point.
Wait, just repeat that. Repeat that.
The overwhelming majority of Gaza lives worse than the overwhelming majority in the West Bank.
I could believe that. Okay.
Okay, and what I'm saying is the counterexample you keep giving me to why what's it called, better conditions. It doesn't equal less violence is literally an example of worse conditions. Like, how is it a counterexample when you're giving me a situation where the conditions are still worse than what you're countering?
Do the conditions have anything to do with the violence, or do the conditions follow the violence?
Like, no, well, I mean,
like if I look at the origination of like Palestinian organized violence, that came from the West Bank. That came in '64 with the PLO from the West Bank, right?
Yeah.
And that, I don't know, was that in response to their living conditions? Or if I look at the origination of violence for the Gaza Strip, I think that the taking hold, like Hamas, and then the growth of Hamas outwards and everything, like was that in response to the living conditions, or was that just...
That was the second point I'm going to get to, but I couldn't get to because we kept having...
Oh, fuck. Okay, well, listen, tomorrow or later, you guys can go right now fight on Loader Stream. You guys can argue about it, so, yeah. Okay, have fun. Okay.
I still want to talk to you about Iran one-on-one.
Yeah, we can do it tomorrow. Yep, or, yeah, whatever. Okay, love you. Bye. Go or fight on Loader Stream.
We're going to go to your Discord. Wait, I don't think Upland...
or he can come back here on mute.
Where are we supposed to go?
I don't know. I can mute you. You can take it.
Thank you very